On the morning of August 20th, 1976, millions of Japanese families were watching a regular morning talk show called Look Look Konnichiwa. It was summer, which in Japan means ghost season, the time when television fills its schedules with horror content to match the heat and the Obon holiday, the period when the dead are believed to return. Japan in 1976 was also deep in what historians now call its occult boom. The Exorcist had recently played in cinemas to packed audiences. Uri Geller had bent spoons on national television, and the country hadn't stopped talking about it. Nostradamus was on magazine covers. The public appetite for the paranormal wasn't casual curiosity. It was genuine hunger. So when the show announced a segment about a pair of old painted scrolls with a dark history, it felt appropriate for the season. It felt safe. What happened next was neither. The scrolls depicted severed heads, not fictional ones, but documentary paintings of two real men executed during Japan's most violent political era in the 1860s, a period when assassinations were so common they had their own name. One of the men was Watanabe Kinzaburo, a senior law enforcement officer feared for his brutal crackdowns on political activists. He was ambushed while fleeing the city, killed, and his head was publicly displayed as a warning to others. A painter was then sent to the site to record what was there. That painting is what ended up on television over 100 years later. The claim that has followed the scroll ever since is that the red paint used to depict the blood was made from Kinzaburo's actual blood. It has never been confirmed. It has never been disproven. The second scroll tells a parallel story. A Buddhist monk named Kodun, just 28 years old, was killed by the same faction. His crime, according to his executioners, was performing prayers intended to bring harm to the emperor. He too was beheaded. He too was painted. Originally, there were around 12 such documentary paintings created from this era. Over time, they scattered, were sold, were lost. Only these two survived together. The scrolls passed through several hands before a private collector brought them home in 1972. Almost immediately, the family began reporting groaning sounds coming from the direction of the scrolls, a persistent dread that settled into the house, and a string of misfortunes they couldn't explain. The wife refused to continue living with them. The family handed the scrolls to a Buddhist temple in Hirosaki, a city in the far north of Japan, where they have remained ever since, with memorial services held twice a year specifically for the souls of the men depicted. Back to August 20th. The production team projected a large image of the scrolls onto a screen behind the studio presenters. The segment covered the history, the assassinations, the blood paint legend, standard spooky summer content. The image of Kinzaburo's severed head sat in the background, eyes closed as they had always been painted. And then something changed. A dark spot appeared on the right eyelid. It looked exactly like a pupil. It moved slightly, not like a smudge shifting, but like an eye that had just opened and was now adjusting, settling, looking outward. The presenters didn't notice because the screen was behind them. The cameras kept rolling, and across Japan, people watching from their living rooms picked up their phones. The NTV switchboard collapsed within minutes, viewers from across the country calling in, all reporting the same thing. The eye in the painting had opened. The production team reviewed the broadcast tape and saw exactly what the viewers described. On the recorded footage, there it was. The story ran in one of Japan's largest newspapers 4 days later, not a tabloid, treated as a documented event, witnessed simultaneously by millions. Many viewers reported more than just seeing something. They described physical reactions, sudden chills, nausea, a feeling that something had looked at them personally through the screen. Some reported their television sets behaved strangely in the hours that followed. These weren't fringe claims from isolated people. They came in volume from viewers in different cities who had no way of coordinating their accounts. The explanations came quickly. A fly landing in exactly the right spot, an old scroll technique where painted features reveal hidden layers depending on light angle, a production cut between a static slide and a live camera shot of the actual scroll that shifted the lighting just enough. None of them fully hold. A fly would need to be unusually large to account for the size of the spot. The lighting theory depends on production details nobody fully agrees on, and random video noise doesn't move the way an eye moves. This is where Japanese folklore becomes relevant. There is a type of spirit called an onryo, a person who died in rage, in humiliation, or with something left unresolved. Their anger doesn't fade after death. It lingers, attaching itself to objects, to places, to paintings. And what defined an onryo more than anything else was this: they were most dangerous when their humiliation was put on display for others to witness. Kinzaburo was a man whose severed head had already been exhibited publicly as a trophy in life. Then a painting of that same head, made possibly with his own blood, was broadcast to an entire nation in death. If the folklore means anything at all, that is exactly the kind of moment something dormant decides it has been patient long enough. What made this impossible to dismiss was the era it happened in. 1976 meant no CGI, no digital trickery, no framework in a viewer's mind for doubting what appeared on live television. If it happened on screen, it happened. There was no other explanation to reach for, and millions of people watched the same thing at the same time, which is not something you can quietly explain away. The scrolls are still at the temple in Hirosaki, displayed twice a year at the spring and autumn equinox, when the priests conduct services for the souls of Kinzaburo and Koden. The autumn date falls on the actual anniversary of Kinzaburo's death, which nobody planned and nobody can quite account for. The footage is still on YouTube, and the right eye of Watanabe Kinzaburo remains closed. In October 2011, a Taiwanese hiking blogger who goes by the name Nick uploads an unlisted video to YouTube with just raw, shaky footage from his phone camera filmed while running down a mountain in the middle of a thunderstorm. He almost does not upload it at all because he does not even notice what is in the footage until he gets home later that night and plays it back on his large computer monitor alone at midnight. The room is dark and the house is silent, and he is just casually scrubbing through the video when something in the background catches his attention. He drags the timeline back a few seconds and watches it again, then again. His heart starts slamming against his chest and his palms go wet because there in the thick bamboo forest just behind where he and his friends had been walking, something that looks exactly like a person is moving through the trees at a speed that no human being should be able to move on that kind of terrain, and it is heading in the wrong direction, straight uphill, deeper into the mountain, as if the storm and the darkness and the altitude mean absolutely nothing to it. Nick is not a ghost hunter. He is not a content creator trying to get famous. He is a regular guy from Taiwan who spends his weekends hiking and running marathons. And on this particular morning, he and 3 friends had driven out before dawn to attempt one of the most brutal climbs in the entire country, a mountain called Ziluan Daishan, standing over 3,000 meters in Nantou County. This mountain is considered one of Taiwan's 7 most punishing summits. The elevation gain alone is equivalent to climbing the Taipei 101 skyscraper more than 3 times without stopping. It is the kind of climb that breaks people on a good day. This was not going to be a good day. They arrived at the Renlun workstation before 6 in the morning, signed the registry, paid their permits, and started up the trail shortly after. And this is where the first detail lands that you need to hold on to. The registration book at the station confirmed that only 4 people had signed up to be on that mountain for the entire day. 4, Nick and his 3 companions. That number becomes very important later. They pushed upward for 5.5 hours through dense forest and reached the summit just before noon. But almost the moment they arrived, the sky turned on them. Thunderstorms moved in fast. The temperature dropped hard. Fog rolled through so thick it swallowed the trees around them in seconds. By 12, they were already heading back down because staying at the top any longer would have been genuinely dangerous. And this is where the descent turns into something else entirely. The forest around them starts to change. The fog is so heavy now that visibility drops to almost nothing. the insects in the canopy above them begin producing a sound that Nick later described as abnormally loud, a constant high-pitched noise that seemed to press in from every direction. Then a snake appears directly on the trail, blocking their path, and they have to carefully step around it. Lightning starts cracking overhead so close they can feel it in their chests. The rain is not falling anymore. It is being thrown sideways through the bamboo. They are not hiking at this point. They are running, sliding, grabbing at branches, trying to get off this mountain before the storm buries them in it. It is around 12:35 when Nick pulls out his phone to film, not because he feels anything supernatural, but because he wants to capture how extreme the conditions are. The footage is chaotic. The camera shakes with every step. You can hear the thunder and the rain and the insects all layered on top of each other. They make it back to the car by 3:55, completely destroyed, soaked through, muscles burning, and they drive home thinking the worst of it is over. Then Nick watches the footage that night. At the 2-minute and 31-second mark, a shape appears in the bamboo behind the group. It is upright, it has the proportions of a person, and it is moving to the right, which means it is heading uphill toward the summit at a time when anyone with any sense would be heading down. It does not move the way a person moves on a steep mountain trail in a storm. It moves fast, unnaturally fast, gliding almost, through terrain that had been tearing Nick and his friends apart for hours. He watches it 3 more times, and each time his body reacts the same way: cold sweat, pounding chest, the absolute certainty that whatever this is, it should not be there. The next day, he shows the footage to his 3 hiking companions, and the room goes completely still. Nobody speaks for a long moment. Then one of them says they should visit a temple, and then slowly, one after another, they begin admitting something that none of them had mentioned to each other until that exact moment. During the descent, while they were stumbling through that fog, each of them had seen things, not the figure from the video, something else. Enormous shapes standing among the trees that looked like massive human silhouettes, completely motionless, watching them pass. They had all seen them. None of them had said a word about it because each one assumed they were losing their mind from exhaustion and fear and did not want to frighten the others. It was only after seeing the video that they realized whatever had been out there with them that afternoon was not something any of them had imagined on their own. The video spread to PTT, Taiwan's largest online forum, and landed on the Supernatural board, where users are famous for being vicious toward anything that looks staged. They did not tear it apart. They took it seriously because nothing about it felt manufactured. Years later, when a Taiwanese horror film called The Tag-Along became a massive hit, built entirely around the legend of a ghostly figure following hikers through the mountains, millions of new viewers found Nick's footage, and the attention exploded all over again. In Taiwanese folklore, there is a creature called the Moshenzi. It is described as a human-shaped demon that lives in mountain forests and draws people into isolated places where they cannot find their way back. Taiwanese hikers have feared this entity for generations. There are traditions you follow when walking through these mountains to avoid attracting its attention. You never call out someone's name. You never tap a person on the shoulder. You never look down at your own feet. The mountain where Nick filmed his video sits on ancestral Bunan indigenous land where belief in mountain spirits stretches back centuries before anyone else ever set foot there. Nick never said he filmed a ghost. He never said it was the Moshenzi. He simply said that whatever was on that mountain with them, all 4 of them felt it before the camera ever caught it, and not one of them has been able to forget it since. There is a YouTube channel called Bad Pioneer. It has 41,000 subscribers, 92 videos, and a description that reads something like reviews, jokes, sports, travel, adventures. Most of the uploads get a few hundred views, maybe 1,000 or 2 on a good day. Knife reviews, military ration taste tests, army stories, walks through autumn forests, visits to a friend's countryside cabin. The kind of content that nobody outside of a small circle of friends and fellow outdoors enthusiasts would ever stumble across. A new video went up just 10 days ago, 6 minutes long. 820 views. It is about a guy named Sergey, about winter, about summer, just life. The channel has been doing this quietly for years and shows no signs of stopping. But the reason this channel has 41,000 subscribers is not because of the knife reviews or the army stories. It is because of one video, one upload from 7 years ago that has been watched 2.9 million times. And once you watch it, you understand exactly why. The video is titled Seryoga the Hunter, Part 2, A Terrifyingly Scary Night in Ambush, 29 minutes and 33 seconds. The footage was shot by a hunter named Sergey in the western Sayan Mountains of Siberia in a remote area called the Long Ravine. The events took place in 2011, but the footage sat around for years before the channel owner, a friend of Sergey's, edited it together and uploaded it. There is a part 1 as well, a 20-minute daytime video with 400,000 views and an epilogue sitting at 615,000. A full-length Spanish subtitled version was uploaded later and now has nearly 500,000 views on its own. Together, these uploads carry almost the entire weight of the channel. The other 89 videos combined do not come close. Part 2 starts calm. Sergey is sitting alone on an old hunting platform high in the trees. Night is falling. He has a rifle and a camera strapped to his flashlight. He is waiting for elk. For the first 13 to 16 minutes, nothing happens. It is just a man in the Siberian taiga doing what he has done his entire life. And then it all goes wrong. Something erupts in the forest around him. Crashing, heavy movement, sounds that have no explanation. Sergey panics immediately. Within seconds, he goes from composed to terrified. He fires his rifle into the darkness multiple times. A text card inserted into the video states that after 3 or 4 shots, everything went quiet for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Then it came back. Whatever was circling him returned, and the disturbance continued until dawn. There is no music in this video, no jump scares or editing, just raw, uncut footage of a lifelong hunter losing his composure completely in the middle of the night. He swears, fumbles with ammunition, breathes in short, panicked bursts. At no point does he appear to be aware the camera is on. He is not performing, and that is exactly what caught people's attention when this footage finally left Russia. The video made it to the English-speaking internet through a Reddit post on the mystery subreddit by a Russian user going by Imaginary Ticket 1375. When the poster translated the context, provided timestamps, and opened by saying they were sick of all the obvious fakes online, the blurry ghosts and garbage UFO clips. They said this video was different. They said this one was real. The post gained serious traction. People watched the video, came back to the thread, and most of them agreed. Not because of dramatic proof of anything, but because the fear looked genuine in a way that is very hard to manufacture. From Reddit, it spread fast. TikTok creators in both English and Spanish started breaking it down. The Spanish-speaking audience turned out to be massive. Bad Pioneer responded by uploading a dedicated 47-minute subtitled version, now sitting at nearly 167,000 views, and a separate 16-minute video where Sergey answers questions specifically from Spanish-speaking viewers. 300,000 views. That is more than most established YouTube channels ever see on a single upload, and it landed on a page that reviews Fisker's Axes. A Spanish forum called Media Vida ran entire threads translating details the English discussions had missed. The video also made it onto paranormal blogs, cryptid boards, and found footage databases that have nothing to do with Russian content. In every community where it surfaced, the reaction landed the same way. The theories differ. Some say bear, some say something far stranger, but almost nobody who watches it thinks Sergey is acting. What also makes this interesting is the timeline. The events happened in 2011. Sergey says in the concluding part of the film that it is now 2013, and he has not returned to that hunting stand in 2 years. And the footage was then edited and uploaded to Bad Pioneer after years based on the upload dates. So there is a gap of roughly 8 years between the night itself and the video going public. That is not the behavior of someone trying to capitalize on a hoax. That is footage that sat in someone's camera for years until a friend decided it was worth putting online. Now, what makes this case unusual is not just the footage, it is the source. When a creepy video goes viral, the channel behind it almost always tells you something. A brand new account with one upload and no history, a channel built to produce horror content, footage ripped and reposted with no context. Bad Pioneer is none of these things. It existed before the Sergey video and has continued to exist long after it. Scroll past the Sergey uploads and look at the other 89 videos, and what you find is someone's life. A 28-minute video visiting Sergey and a friend named Mikhail at their dacha, grilling food and shooting guns. 1,300 views. A 17-minute autumn forest walk. 1,400 views. Army stories across multiple parts. A Fisker's axe review, knife comparisons. A hunting expo in Krasnoyarsk. Videos from a trip to Goa sitting at under 1,000 views each from 7 years ago, back when the channel was brand new. There is a creative retelling from 2 years ago titled Seryoga the Hunter, Panic in the Night Forest. 9,500 views. Even that, the one video that directly revisits the original story, barely registers compared to the real thing. This is not a content strategy. This is someone documenting their actual life over the span of years. There are also several follow-up videos that are worth noting. The channel uploaded an hour and 14-minute video where the channel owner and Sergey sit together reading hate comments and responding to them. 58,000 views. There is a pre-New Year's conversation where they apparently reveal the location of the area. 10,000 views. There is a video titled A Parcel for Seryoga where someone sends him a care package, and the description flat out says, "People are going to that labaz." 18,000 views. These are real people with a real ongoing relationship to the events in that footage. They are not performers who staged something and moved on. They are two friends who have been talking about this on camera for the better part of a decade. Nobody builds a channel with 92 uploads over 7 years of knife reviews and army stories and autumn walks and hour-long conversations with their buddy just to stage one paranormal video. The volume of completely unremarkable content surrounding that single night of footage is what makes it so hard to write off. And the channel is not done. A new video went up 10 days ago. Another one will probably go up next month. Meanwhile, that 29-minute upload from a night in 2011 in the Western Sayan Mountains continues to sit at 2.9 million views, still being found by new people all the time, the same way everyone else found it, by stumbling across a Reddit post or a TikTok breakdown or a forum thread in a language they do not even speak, clicking on it expecting another fake, and then not being quite so sure anymore. In 2024, a Chinese television program decided to try something different. They gave their hosts hidden camera glasses and tiny microphones, dressed them up like regular tourists, and sent them out into the streets of Seoul, South Korea. The goal was straightforward: find out if solo travelers were really being targeted by religious cult members. What they recorded over the next few hours would show just how well organized and psychologically manipulative these groups really were. Xiaohua, one of the hosts, puts on her camera glasses and talks through the plan with her partner. They've been hearing warnings from locals. Be careful when you're traveling in Korea. Random people will come up and start talking to you on the street. Before you realize what's happening, they'll be trying to get you to join their religion. The team splits up. Xiaohua starts walking through Hongdae, one of the busiest neighborhoods in Seoul, trying her best to look like a confused tourist. She walks around holding a cup of milk tea, wandering like she's lost. For almost 2 hours, nothing happens. Then she changes locations to Sinchon, on a quieter side street about 200 meters from a basketball court. A woman approaches. The camera captures her innocent eyes and gentle smile. She tells Xiaohua she wants to talk about Korean culture. The woman pulls out her translation app and starts talking about Seolal and Chuseok.
大概要多久？ 한 10분에서 15분.
Korean holidays. She shows pictures of hanbok. It seems harmless at first, but then a man appears and starts walking with them. Xiaohua asks if they know each other, and the woman says they're student and teacher. Meanwhile, Xiaohua's colleague is following from a distance with his own hidden camera. He's watching as this woman slowly leads Xiaohua away from all the crowded areas and into a small park on the side of the street. The woman's friendly questions turn into a more direct offer. Would Xiaohua like to actually experience traditional Korean culture for herself? There's a place near Sindarim's subway station, she says. It only takes about 20 minutes to get there. What the woman doesn't mention is that this has absolutely nothing to do with Korean culture. This is about a religious group called Daesun Jinriho. The cult's history goes back to Korea's early 1900s, when a man named Kang Jong-san claimed he was the human form of the supreme god sent down to reorganize heaven and earth. When he died in 1909, his followers split into dozens of groups. One grew into what we see today, an organization worth billions, built on making people afraid and guilty about their ancestors. The hidden camera keeps recording as Xiaohua gets led through Seoul's rainy streets to an unmarked building. From the outside, you might think it's a bar or office space. The location sharing on Xiaohua's phone suddenly stops working. Her colleague, watching from across the street, starts getting worried. It's 8:30 in the evening, and she's been inside for over an hour with no response to his messages. He ends up sitting in a nearby fried chicken restaurant, which is kind of funny in a dark way because Xiaohua had been asking to eat fried chicken for 3 straight days since they got to Korea. Now here he is, eating it without her, while she's stuck inside doing who knows what. The chicken doesn't taste good at all because he feels so guilty about the whole situation. When Xiaohua's camera glasses finally turn back on, we can see what she went through inside that building. The video is broken up and incomplete, but it shows enough. She's on the second floor in what looks like a small office with a desk. There's a screen on the wall with white text written vertically, something about the 9 heavens god and return to position. The woman, who introduces herself as Wu Baojin, takes Xiaohua through a series of small rooms. All the doors are shut. The whole setup seems designed to make you feel confused and off balance. They take away her phone right away. They ask for her name, her birth date, and her parents' names. She hesitates, but the woman just keeps smiling. Then they make her change into a hanbok. What follows is an exhausting ritual that goes on for hours. Xiaohua has to sit cross-legged, bow over and over, stand up, sit back down. Her legs cramp so bad she can barely stand. Then Wu Baojin takes the paper with Xiaohua's information and starts burning it in the palm of Xiaohua's hand, chanting in Korean the whole time. When it's over, Wu Baojin tells her, "You have entered the path now." But here's what the cult actually teaches, the part they don't explain during that friendly first conversation. They believe all suffering comes from ancestral grudges. Every sickness, accident, or heartbreak is punishment passed down through your family. The only way to free yourself and your ancestors is to build up dong, or merit. And how? By giving them money. Money offered directly to the gods is the highest form of good deed. To see how far this manipulation could go, the program sent in a second person. Wu Zhong pretended to be Xiaohua's friend, who she randomly met while traveling. His camera footage is even more disturbing. When Wu Zhong hesitates about donating money, the teacher's face changes. She tells him 1 day of delay means his ancestors suffer a month in the underworld. His trouble, sleeping, and headaches are caused by angry spirits demanding payment. They ask how much money he brought for his trip, then start managing his finances. They suggest he could save 2 million yuan by staying at the cult's facilities instead of a hotel. That money could save his ancestors. Every time he hesitates, if you truly cared about your family's peace, you would donate today. At the bank, the teacher refuses to let cameras see her face. When Wu Zhong hits his withdrawal limit, she panics. They rush to the airport since Wu Zhong must leave that day. She takes his suitcase until he withdraws the last 500,000 yuan. The money gets deposited under Dawn Truth Society, a front for Daesun Jinriho. Legally, it's voluntary, but really, it's spiritual ransom. Even after the reporters leave Korea, the calls don't stop. 40 missed calls in one day. Messages saying, "We only want what's best for you. Your ancestors are waiting." Xiaohua later admits something surprising. She misses them. The recruiters were kind and gentle, seemed to care more than anyone else. When you watch Wu Baozhen crying real tears during their last talk, pleading about how the cult saved her life, it's hard to tell if it's real. The crew says if she's acting, she deserves an award. Wu Baozhen explains that before the cult, she was fighting with her family daily, couldn't keep a job, struggling with everything. Xiaohua asks, how can you convince someone like that? What can you say? Nothing. Today, Daesun Jinriho runs temples, universities, and hospitals worth billions, while draining members of houses, inheritances, and savings. And on Seoul's streets right now, recruiters with kind faces still approach solo travelers, ready to talk about Korean culture. On March 1st of 1998, a family in Taichung went hiking at the Dakeng scenic area and filmed the entire trip on a V8 camcorder, the kind of bulky handheld camera that everyone used in the late 90s. It was a completely ordinary weekend outing with multiple generations walking together through bamboo groves and forest trails, the camera mostly pointed at whoever was in front, catching bits of conversation and laughter and the kind of footage that ends up sitting in a drawer for years because nobody ever has a reason to watch it back. A few days after the hike, the sister's husband, a man who had been in perfectly good health with no signs of anything wrong, suddenly collapsed, was hospitalized, then died shortly after with no warning or diagnosis that made the speed of it make sense. The family buried him and tried to carry on with their lives. About 18 months later, a man in the family named Lu pulled the old tape out because he wanted to find footage of the brother-in-law from that last day they had all been together. One final recording of him alive and walking and smiling before everything fell apart. He put the tape in, started watching, then saw something that made him stop the playback completely. Walking behind the family throughout the hike, visible across multiple separate sections of more than 30 minutes of footage, was a small girl dressed in red who appeared to be around 5 to 7 years old, with her hair pulled back, moving at the rear of the hiking column while maintaining a steady distance behind the last family member as though she had always been part of the group. But no one in the family had any memory of her being there. Not a faint memory, not a half-forgotten impression, nothing. The cameraman said later that he had been focused entirely on his relatives, with absolutely zero awareness of any child following them at any point during the entire hike, which every other family member confirmed without hesitation. She was on the tape, but she was not in anyone's memory. Two facts that could not be made to sit together no matter how many times they watched it back. The girl walking behind them was not the only thing wrong with the footage either. When Lu looked at the sections showing his brother-in-law, the man who would be dead within days of this recording, something appeared in his mouth whenever he smiled that had never been there in life. What looked like elongated teeth resembling fangs were clearly visible on the tape in multiple frames, yet the man had no such feature because his family had looked at his face every single day for years without ever noticing anything unusual about his teeth. On this tape filmed on this specific day at this specific location, his face showed something that could not be explained, while the girl in red walked behind him through the trees with eyes that appeared as deep black empty sockets, hollow and sunken in a way that went far beyond shadow or bad lighting or the limitations. Ghosts and Spirits on GTV then submitted the tape. The assistant video editor assigned to cut the segment stayed late in the office that night working on it alone and assuming it would turn out to be nothing, because most viewer submissions always did. Then he found the girl in the footage, started rewinding, playing it back frame by frame, looking for any sign of tampering. What happened next is something he has described multiple times since. He felt a sudden, overwhelming sensation that the girl moved out of the screen and was staring directly at him from inside the room. He panicked, left the building immediately, went home. That night, he woke to a loud noise, lifted his head, saw the shape of a small girl sitting motionless on his desk in the dark. He could never say with certainty whether it had been a dream or something else entirely. When the segment aired, the reaction across Taiwan was immediate and enormous because the image of the girl was far sharper and clearer than the kind of blurry, ambiguous footage that paranormal programs usually dealt with. She was distinctly visible, girl, distinctly shaped like a child, distinctly walking with purpose behind people who had no idea she was there. The producers launched a public appeal asking anyone who could identify her to come forward, returned to the Dakheng area, went to every school and every household in the surrounding neighborhoods. Nobody recognized her. Not a single person in the entire district could say who she was or where she came from. One boy told the television crew that he had seen a girl matching her description on the trails before, but that when he tried to follow her, she vanished. Another man said he had encountered her while driving near the area, after which his life collapsed into a prolonged streak of terrible luck he could not escape. The program's official conclusion delivered during the broadcast was that the little girl in red does not exist in our physical space. They were not being dramatic. They had searched the area, asked every reasonable source, followed every lead, found nothing that could account for a child appearing across 30 minutes of footage on a family hiking trail in broad daylight without a single living person ever noticing her with their own eyes. The tape ran more than 30 minutes long, with her appearing at multiple separate points throughout, not just in one brief moment that could be dismissed as a trick of the light. She was there at the beginning, she was there in the middle, she was there near the end, always behind them, always at the same distance, always with those same hollow black spaces where her eyes should have been. The man she walked closest to, the one whose face showed something on tape that was never there in life, was dead before the month was over. Nobody has ever identified her. The tape still exists. The trail is still open. 27 years later, the only honest thing anyone can say about what was recorded that afternoon in Dakheng is that a camera saw something that every person present that day somehow did not. In May 2000, passengers boarded what should have been a routine 70-minute bus ride in Japan, and among them was a 6-year-old girl traveling alone, regular commuters heading home, and a 17-year-old boy who was about to turn an ordinary Tuesday into a 15-hour nightmare that would shock the entire nation. Picture this: you're sitting on a bus, maybe reading a book or staring out the window, when suddenly the person next to you stands up and presses a chef's knife against the driver's throat, and that's exactly what happened when this teenager walked up to the front of the bus and uttered a sentence that would change everything, saying, "You are not going to Tenzin, you are going to hell." The driver froze and the passengers froze, and in those first few moments of confusion, the boy started barking orders to draw the curtains and force everyone to the back of the bus right now, while the 20 passengers on board didn't know what was happening or why, but they could see the blade pressed against their driver's neck and they knew they had to comply. But here's where it gets even more surreal, because in the middle of all this chaos, one woman was still asleep and she hadn't heard the commotion, hadn't seen the knife, and was completely unaware that her life was in danger, which irritated the hijacker to the point that he walked right up to her, shook her awake, and without hesitation slashed her neck just like that, with his only reason being, "You're not listening to me." That single act of violence changed the entire atmosphere on that bus, because everyone suddenly understood that this wasn't just some troubled kid making empty threats, but something real and deadly. And the fact that he was only 17 years old didn't matter anymore, since nobody was going to resist after seeing what he was capable of doing. The hijacker then reorganized the passengers by forcing the women to move to the front seats while pushing the men to the back, and the bus kept moving with the terrified driver following the boys' directions and taking them further and further from their original destination as an hour passed, and then another, with the tension becoming completely unbearable. Eventually, the driver mustered up the courage to make a request because the bus didn't have a toilet and nature was calling, so he needed a restroom break, and the hijacker knew this was risky since letting people off the bus meant giving them a chance to escape or alert the authorities. But he also knew he couldn't keep everyone trapped forever without dealing with basic human needs, so he came up with a plan where passengers could use the restroom one at a time with one deadly catch. If anybody failed to return to the bus, he would kill the rest. The first woman was allowed off, and she walked to the restroom at whatever stop they'd pulled into, and then she made a choice by not coming back, even though she knew the warning and knew what the hijacker had threatened. But she also knew this might be the only chance anyone had of getting help. so she stayed away, hoping to alert someone, anyone, about what was happening on that bus. Back on the bus, the 17-year-old made good on his promise by walking up to another woman, a passenger named Miss Yamaguchi, and slashing her before turning to yet another woman, and making it crystal clear that if anything else went wrong, she would be next. The woman was paralyzed with fear, but that fear also gave her a burst of desperate courage, so she saw a window and made a split-second decision to jump and crash through the glass to escape into the street, probably thinking she just saved her own life. But every action had a consequence on that bus because the hijacker responded to her escape by slashing another passenger, and then to ensure he maintained control, he grabbed the 6-year-old girl who had been traveling alone and declared her his hostage, using a child as his insurance policy. Meanwhile, the woman who had escaped after the bathroom break earlier had finally found help and alerted the authorities about the hijacking. So by the time the bus entered the Sano Expressway, the police were already preparing roadblocks as word was spreading fast that a bus full of hostages was heading their way and they needed to stop it. When the bus approached the roadblock, the officers saw exactly what they were dealing with when they spotted a teenage boy with a knife and a 6-year-old girl held in front of him like a shield, and the hijacker demanded passage through the blockade while threatening to hurt the child if they didn't let him through, which left the authorities with no choice but to let him pass. But the roadblock did something important by forcing the bus to slow down, and in that moment of reduced speed, one of the male passengers saw his opportunity and bolted off the bus to safety, and his escape sent a message to the other men still trapped on board to stay alert and look for their chance, because they could get out of this too. The hijacker realized things were spiraling out of his control and made another decision to order all the remaining men off the bus. So just like that, the male passengers were released, leaving only women and the child still in danger, while the boy kept that 6-year-old girl close as his guarantee of safety. By 5:50 in the evening, official negotiations began between the 17-year-old and the authorities, and he had demands including a bulletproof vest, a handgun, fuel for the bus, and continued passage, and in exchange he'd consider releasing one or more passengers, but through all of this, he never explained why or what the point was of doing any of this in the first place. The standoff continued through the night as hours turned into more hours, and by 5 in the morning, there were still 9 people trapped on that bus who had been held hostage for nearly 15 hours, which is when Japan's special assault team made their move by storming the vehicle using smoke bombs to create chaos and confusion that gave them the split second they needed to capture the hijacker. When everything was finally over, the toll became clear, with 3 women having been slashed primarily in the neck and upper body areas, and one of them didn't survive while several others were injured during the ordeal, which meant a routine bus ride had turned into a complete tragedy. But the question everyone wanted answered was why a 17-year-old boy would do something so extreme, so violent, and so senseless, and the answer when it finally came was heartbreaking in its own way. The perpetrator revealed that his motive was to express his hatred for society and to attract attention, but that hatred didn't come from nowhere since it had roots in a traumatic experience from his past, where this boy had been bullied by his classmates who one day dared him to do something to prove his courage by telling him to jump down a staircase. So he did it and he jumped, which resulted in severe injuries that required multiple surgeries and caused him to miss his graduation ceremony because he was stuck in a hospital bed, and he was even forced to take his high school entrance exams in his hospital room despite being a kid who had been top of his class academically with a bright future ahead of him. But in one moment of peer pressure and misguided bravery, everything changed. The anger from that incident never left him as it festered and grew and consumed him until he became obsessed with planning a crime big enough to attract attention, big enough to make people see him, and big enough to make society pay attention to what had happened to him. And here's the final twist that makes this whole story even more complicated. Despite the severity of his crimes, and despite the fact that a woman died and others were traumatized for life, the hijacker was was released from a medical reformatory facility after only 6 years because he was a minor, and because of that same status, his name was never publicly released either. A 15-hour hijacking, a life lost, and countless others forever changed, with the person responsible walking free after 6 years, and that's the story of the Japanese bus hijacking of May 2000, a tragedy born from bullying, fueled by rage, and ended with questions about justice that still linger today.
On May 28, 2019, at around 6:20 in the morning, a woman was walking home in Sillim-dong, a neighborhood in Seoul's Gwanak district. She entered her apartment building. A man in a baseball cap and a long sweater followed her through the entrance. They both got into the elevator, and the man pressed a floor number higher than hers. This was not where he lived. Pressing a higher floor made it look like they were going to different places. She stepped off at her floor, and in the seconds before the elevator doors closed, the man slipped out behind her and walked to her door. She entered her keypad code, stepped inside, and the door swung shut. 1 second later, the man lunged for it. The building's corridor camera recorded all of this. The footage is 85 seconds in the version that first went viral. An extended version was released later by Korean broadcasters, shows what happens next, which is that the man did not leave. For approximately 10 minutes, he stayed in the hallway, pacing back and forth, returning to her door, testing the handle, appearing to knock, and then coming back to test it again. One detail that tends to get passed over is that throughout all of this, the man was actively managing the camera, kept lowering his head, pulled his sweater up around his neck. There was a tattoo in that area, and he was keeping it out of frame. So this was a person who knew a camera was recording him and was trying to hide identifying features from it, and still standing at her door trying to get in. He was not panicked or oblivious. Korean apartment doors use digital keypads instead of physical keys. You punch in a numbered code and the door unlocks. The man had been standing directly behind this woman when she entered her code, close enough to follow her through the door, close enough to see the keypad, close enough to watch her fingers. A Korean vlogger who lives near Sillim and covered the case pointed out that in the extended footage, the man appears to take out a flashlight and scan the keypad for fingerprint residue, trying to figure out which numbers she'd pressed. After seeing this detail, the vlogger said she started wiping her own keypad clean every time she came home. The woman noticed the man still outside after it happened. She called the police and was unharmed. Found out later, same way everyone else did, by watching the footage. The video was posted to Twitter the same day, tagged with the phrase that immediately went viral in Korea. Within hours, it had been shared 58,000 times, and within days it had spread internationally. The man, surnamed Joe, was 30 years old and turned himself in the next morning after seeing the footage going viral. He walked into a police station and said he was drunk and didn't remember what happened. The footage shows a man who pressed a false elevator button to deceive someone, hid identifying features from a camera, and stood at a locked door for 10 minutes, making repeated attempts to get in. Whatever was in his system that morning, the behavior on camera isn't random. It's calculated. Later, police charged him with trespassing, not attempted rape or sexual assault. He was charged with trespassing. Their statement said that in order to charge for rape, there needs to be violence or threat, and that confirming a rape attempt based solely on CCTV footage was difficult. A petition went up on the Blue House website the same day. Within 48 hours, it had between 77,000 and 90,000 signatures, depending on the source. Women living alone in Sillim-dong started speaking to newspapers. A 25-year-old university student in the area told the Korea Times she had experienced drunk men following her to the front door multiple times, kept a male friend on the phone while running inside. Not describing the Joe case, she was describing her own life, which she had never spoken about publicly before. The footage had made something visible that women in the neighborhood already knew was there. Police reversed course within days. Joe was charged with attempted rape under the Act on Special Cases concerning the punishment of sexual crimes. The footage was the same. Nothing in it had changed. What changed was the number of signatures on the petition. Joe also had a prior record. In 2012, 7 years before Sillim, he'd been fined for sexually harassing a woman on the street. 7 years between documented incidents. What happened in between produced no formal record, which doesn't mean nothing happened. it means nothing got caught on a camera that ended up on Twitter. The court found Joe guilty, and the judges reportedly had strong suspicions that the intent was sexual assault. The sentence was 1 year in prison. A law professor at Sukmyung Women's University stated plainly that unlike arson or murder, Korean law had no provisions for punishing rape or sexual violence in its planning or preparation stages. A man could be caught on camera, the intent could look obvious to everyone watching, and system would still produce 1 year. At the time of the incident, 2.8 million women in South Korea were living alone. The country had no specific anti-stalking law. Stalking could only be prosecuted through other charges like trespassing or harassment, and it wasn't working. 9 out of 10 stalking suspects were going unpunished. South Korea passed the Stalking Crime Punishment Act in 2021, 2 years after Silim. The thing that stays with people about this case isn't what happened, it's what almost happened. If the door had taken 1 more second to close, there is no corridor footage, there's no viral video or petition. There's whatever took place inside that apartment. The woman was just going to bed, entered her code at the speed she always entered it, the door locked in the time it always takes to lock. In January of 1997, one of the biggest pop stars in South Korea released a music video that would haunt his career for the next 24 years. His name was Lee Seung-hwan, and at this point he's about as big as it gets. 10 million records sold, a 5th album that was one of the year's most anticipated releases. The title track was a ballad called I Want, and like most big singles back then, it came with a high-budget music video. They cast 2 famous actors as a falling-apart couple and shot part of it down in the Seoul subway, at Gwangnaru Station on the brand new Line 5. One of the shots was simple, a train pulling in, filmed from outside through the front window of the driver's cockpit. You can see the operator at the controls. And you can see someone standing next to him. It's a woman, long, dark hair, what looks like white clothing, standing perfectly still in a space barely big enough for one person, facing forward, not moving or looking at the camera. And the second this aired, people noticed. They rewound it and watched it again, because there was a very specific problem with this woman being in this shot. The cockpit of a Seoul subway train is restricted. By law, the only person allowed in there is the certified operator. No passengers, crew, or any exceptions. And the production team hadn't put anyone in there. The actress wasn't in that scene. Nobody on the crew remembered seeing a woman get in or out. And the operator said what he'd keep saying for the next 2 decades. He was alone the entire time. So the video had caught a woman who, by every account anyone could give, should not have existed. This was 1997, so there was no internet, but the footage tore across the country anyway. TV broadcasts, word of mouth, VHS copies passed hand to hand. The broadcasters pulled the video almost immediately, and Lee's team recut it, digitally erasing the woman and re-releasing a clean version, which, predictably, made everything worse. Cutting her out just convinced everyone there'd been something real to cut. And the original kept circulating underground, the way forbidden things always do. From there, 3 theories took over the country, and each one is its own kind of unsettling. The first was that she was a Cheonyo Guishin, a maiden ghost. In Korean folklore, this is the spirit of a young woman who died before she could marry, always described the same way. Long dark hair, loose white clothing, a blank face, and a deep resentment toward men who wronged her in life. The woman in the cockpit matched that almost point for point, standing next to a man in a sealed little room. And to a Korean audience, this isn't a campfire story, it runs deep in the culture, so seeing one apparently caught on film genuinely terrified people. The second theory is darker, because it pulled a real dead woman into it. Back in 1961, a 19-year-old college student named Kim Hak-ja was murdered by her own cousin, who lured her to a deserted stretch of Riverside Park, and when she rejected him, killed her and threw her body into the Han River. That park sits directly across from Gwangnaru Station, the exact place they filmed. people started comparing the woman in the video to photos of Kim Hak-ja, and a major broadcaster, SBS, gave the theory a whole special. During it, Hak-ja's own sister called in to say she believed the woman in that footage was her murdered sibling. But here's the part that stuck with me. Before the special even aired, a shaman begged the network to cancel it. He said Kim Hak-ja had come to him in a dream and warned that if her identity was made public, people would get hurt at Gwangnaru Station. SBS aired it anyway, and in the weeks that followed, there was a string of accidents in and around that station. Coincidence? Probably. But for a country already neck-deep in ghost fever, it didn't feel like one. The third theory was the rational one, and the cruelest. That Lee Sung-hwan had simply faked it, inserted the woman with CGI to manufacture a controversy and sell records. Clean explanation. One problem, the technology to do that did not exist in 1997. Not in Korea, not in Hollywood. Forensic experts who analyzed the footage confirmed she hadn't been added after the fact. Whoever she was physically there when the camera rolled. And this is where it stops being a ghost story and turns into something worse, because real people's lives started getting destroyed over it. The director, under enormous pressure, suddenly claimed he'd been coerced into inserting the figure by the company that ran the new line, that they wanted buzz for the station opening. The transit company came back furious, threatened to sue, and the confession fell apart. It was eventually exposed as false. But the newspapers had already printed it as fact, with Lee Sung-hwan's name welded to the word fraud. Then the government got involved. The ghost craze, the whole thing it kicked off, was making religious groups nervous, and they had real political pull, so they leaned on the government to crack down on paranormal media. It worked, and Lee Sung-hwan, now treated as the source of the whole epidemic, got quietly shut out of the industry. He held a press conference with CGI experts to prove the footage was untouched, and 2 journalists showed up. He later said it nearly made him quit music for good. And then the case just sat there for 18 years. In 2015, he brought it back himself with a Facebook post stating he'd never confessed to anything the article claiming he had was invented by the reporter who wrote it. He posted the original footage publicly. It reopened the conversation, but it didn't end it, because nobody still knew who the woman was. And then, around 2018, she came forward herself. Through a professor who ran a small mystery club, a woman got in touch and said she was the ghost, and what she described was so ordinary it almost feels like a letdown, until you sit with it. She'd been friends with the train operator at Gwangnaru, and she'd always wanted to see what it looked like from the front of the train, so she asked to ride up in the cockpit. He said no. She kept asking. Eventually he gave in. The crew happened to be shooting that morning, and they figured the odds of her making the final cut were basically nothing. They were wrong. She was standing right there next to him, in a beige dress that the blue subway lighting turned white, with long straight hair that the rough footage smeared into something loose around her face. They said nothing for one simple reason. He could have lost his job. Letting a civilian into that cockpit was a serious violation, and the bigger the story got, the more impossible coming clean became. So they stayed quiet. He worked until he retired, and only then, with nothing left to lose, did the truth come out. And that's the part that gets me. The ghost was never the scary thing here. Everything that grew out of it was. One harmless, impulsive decision got caught by the wrong camera at the wrong moment. And because nobody could explain it, the empty space filled with everything else. Ghost theories, a murdered girl dragged back into the light, a shaman's warning, a government crackdown, a famous man who spent years unable to prove he hadn't done something he never did. All of it on top of 2 frightened people who just didn't want one guy to lose his job. A beige dress, blue lights, and 24 years of a country being haunted by it.
In the years after the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia was not doing well. The economy had fallen apart, Institutions had stopped functioning, and millions of people were left to figure out survival on their own. In small rural towns especially, the kind of towns that had already been forgotten before the collapse, people were living with almost no support at all. And it is in exactly that kind of place, in exactly that kind of moment, that one of the strangest cases in Russian history quietly began. The town is called Kishtim. It sits in the Chelyabinsk region of the southern Ural Mountains, a small industrial settlement that most people had never heard of and had no reason to visit. But Kishtim carries something with it that most towns do not. In 1957, a cooling system at a nearby nuclear facility called Mayak failed, and a tank holding radioactive waste exploded. The blast sent a cloud of contamination across more than 50,000 square kilometers of countryside. Over 10,000 people were eventually evacuated without ever being told why. The Soviet government classified the whole event for decades, and the region around Kishtim, already quietly poisoned, just kept going. Fishermen there pulled fish from rivers with no eyes. Children grew up under a nuclear shadow that nobody officially acknowledged. By the time the 1990s arrived, the area had been living with the biological consequences of that disaster for nearly 40 years. In May 1996, an elderly woman named Tamara Prosverina walked into the forest near her village of Kaulinovi, just outside Kishtim, heading to collect water from a well. She came back carrying something small, wrapped in a blanket, something she started calling Alyoshenka, her son's name. She told neighbors it was her baby and asked people on the street for medicine for it. Everyone assumed she was having an episode. Prosverina had a long history of psychiatric illness, and the people around her had learned to mostly ignore her more unusual behavior. Nobody looked inside the blanket, but some people did eventually see what was inside. Her friend Tamara Naumova described it later: brown body, no hair, enormous protruding eyes, moving its tiny lips, making small, squeaking sounds. It was alive. The creature was roughly 20 to 25 centimeters long, about the size of a ruler, with an extremely thin body and a head that was elongated and pointed at the top. No visible ears, no umbilical cord. Eyewitnesses who saw it described its skull as almost architectural, like a water lily from the front and a huge protruding dome from the side. Multiple people saw it independently and described it in almost identical terms. In July 1996, Prosverina was hospitalized at a psychiatric clinic. She kept telling staff she needed to go home to care for her baby. Nobody listened. While she was gone, the creature died in the apartment, most likely from dehydration or starvation. A man named Nurtinov found it, placed it on a board in a garage, and it dried into a mummy within hours. He kept it. Then Nurtinov was arrested for an unrelated theft, and during that investigation, he mentioned to police that he had a strange mummified creature at home. That is how the authorities first found out Alyoshenka existed. And a police investigator named Vladimir Bendlin heard about it and could not let it go. His superiors told him to drop it and focus on his actual caseload. Bendlin ignored them. He obtained a video camera, tracked down everyone who had any connection to the creature, and started recording everything. He brought witnesses into the police station. He filmed the mummy from every angle. He asked people to describe what they saw, when they saw it, what state it was in. The resulting footage is the only visual record of Alyoshenka that has ever existed, and it is still online today. It is grainy and poorly lit and shot on a consumer camera, and watching it is deeply unsettling in a way that is hard to fully explain. The mummy is small and strange and unmistakably real. It is not a doll. The skull has those ridges running to the point at the top. The eye sockets are enormous. The body is skeletal. Witnesses on camera describe the living creature with a flat, plain sincerity that does not read as performance. Scientists who examined the remains reached a fairly consistent conclusion. A forensic pathologist confirmed the mummy was genuine biological tissue. A gynecologist identified the skull shape as a rare congenital deformity called trefoil skull, where the cranial bones fuse prematurely and the head grows in an abnormal direction, producing exactly the pointed, elongated shape Alyoshenka had. The working theory was that this was a severely premature human infant, probably around 20 to 25 weeks of gestation, born with multiple serious birth defects and abandoned near the well where Prosperina found it. Given what had been happening biologically in the Kishtim region for 40 years, a severely deformed infant born there was not a strange occurrence. It was predictable. In 2002, a cloth used to wrap the body was DNA tested at a Russian genetics institute. The results showed human DNA with numerous developmental abnormalities. The UFO community saw things differently. A researcher named Chernobrov claimed that preliminary tests had found a gene in the samples that did not correspond to any known human or primate DNA. He called Alyoshenka an extraterrestrial or a human-alien hybrid. These claims were never published in any scientific journal or independently verified, but they spread widely. The physical features that doctors explained through radiation-linked birth defects, UFO researchers reinterpreted as evidence of alien biology, on the absence of ears, the lack of genitalia, the unusual skull, the small size. In post-Soviet Russia, where official information had been suppressed and manipulated for decades, people were not wrong to be skeptical of institutional explanations. The extraterrestrial theory filled a space that official science had not yet fully closed. Then the body disappeared. Bendlin handed the mummy to a woman who presented herself as a scientific researcher and promised professional analysis. It passed through several more sets of hands after that, men with official-looking credentials and black cars who said they would release full findings. They never did. Where the remains are now, nobody knows. Some say the FSB took them. Some say a private collector bought them. Some say they were stolen. And the only person who could definitively describe the living creature, Prosperina herself, was struck and killed by a truck in 1999 after being released from the clinic. The main witness was gone. The body was gone. Only Bendlin's footage remained. In 2018, scientists in California published a full genomic analysis of something called the Atacama humanoid, a mummified creature found in Chile with an almost identical appearance to Alyoshenka. Pointed skull, large eye sockets, skeletal body. For years, the UFO community had held it up as proof of alien life. The DNA results showed it was a premature human girl with multiple skeletal mutations. The researchers were explicit that this provided a direct scientific model for cases like the Kishtim dwarf. The same deformities, the same causes, the same tragedy. What the Kishtim dwarf actually was, in all likelihood, is a severely deformed premature infant born into one of the most radiologically contaminated regions on Earth, found by a lonely, confused woman who loved it for a few weeks and called it by her son's name. That is not a lesser story than the alien version. It is a more devastating one. It is a story about what nuclear contamination actually costs, paid in the bodies of children nobody recorded and nobody counted. And the fact that the remains vanished before science could finish the job means the case has never fully closed. Bendlin's footage is still there. The witnesses are mostly gone. And in the forest outside Kishtim, the site where Prosperina found what she found is still fenced off with barbed wire. Most people, an elementary school teacher in Japan set up a camera in front of a classroom blackboard and filmed each of his students one by one as part of the kind of simple and warm project that schools run every few years when a teacher wants to do something more meaningful than a standard end-of-year activity. Each child would walk up, stand in front of the lens, and speak directly to their future self, talking about what they wanted to be, who they hoped to become, and what they imagined their life would look like when 10 years had passed. The tape would then be sealed, buried somewhere on school grounds, and dug up at a class reunion a decade later, a time capsule, a document of who they were before life had a chance to complicate things. Nobody involved that day had any reason to think the tape would become anything other than a sweet and slightly embarrassing piece of childhood nostalgia, and for 10 years, sitting sealed in the ground, that is exactly what it remained. The reunion happened around the year 2000, and the organizer, who had been class president back in elementary school, had spent months tracking down former classmates and managed to get almost everyone into the same room. Someone suggested screening the tape at the bar they had rented out for the evening, so they connected it to the television and gathered around to watch themselves as 11 and 12-year-olds delivering their little speeches to the future, nostalgic and funny and slightly uncomfortable in the way that watching your childhood self always tends to be. And then someone in the room noticed something wrong with one particular moment on the tape. The girl's name was Ohashi Takako, and during their time in elementary school together, she had been quiet in the way that certain children are quietly present without ever quite becoming central in anyone's specific memories of that period. The kind of student who existed at the edges of the classroom without causing trouble, who spent her lunch breaks alone in the music room practicing piano rather than outside with the rest of her classmates. Someone you knew was there without being able to attach many particular stories to her name when you thought back years later. On the tape, she stood in front of the blackboard and delivered her message to the future in a voice that was clear and genuinely sincere, talking about wanting to become a piano teacher like her mother, about wanting to write her own songs someday and perform them for people who would actually sit down and listen. And it was the kind of specific and gentle dream that tells you something real about a person, said the way children say things when they are meaning every word of it rather than simply performing for whoever is holding the camera. And then for just a fraction of a second, her face changed, and everyone watching at the reunion described it the same way when they were later asked about it, a twist or a warp moving through her expression for one brief instant. And what every witness was careful to emphasize was that it was not the whole frame, and it was not the kind of general image degradation you would expect from a VHS tape that had been sitting in the ground for a decade, but specifically her face and specifically that moment, as though something had looked directly through her and into the camera before it was gone. And when they rewound the tape and watched it again, the same thing happened in exactly the same place, consistent and unchanging, no matter how many times they ran it back. Ohashi Takako was the only person from the class who had not come to the reunion, and when the organizer had worked through his list, trying to reach everyone, she was the last name that never got crossed off, the calls going unanswered and nobody among the former classmates having stayed in contact with her. And when he dug a little deeper, he found that at some point during her middle school years, she had disappeared along with her entire family in the way that has its own specific word in Japanese, johatsu, which translates to evaporation and refers to people, sometimes individuals and sometimes whole families, who vanish deliberately and completely, with no trail left behind, no record, no announcement, no way for anyone who once knew them to find out where they went or what happened. Businesses existing in Japan specifically to help families disappear this way when debt or some unbearable circumstance has made staying in their own lives impossible. The documentary then cuts to an interview with the teacher who filmed the original tape, and his testimony is what makes everything significantly harder to dismiss, because he confirmed that he stood near the camera for the entire session, and that if any child had made a strange expression during their turn, the recording would have been stopped and restarted, meaning he was watching the whole time and saw nothing unusual, and whatever appears on the tape was simply not visible to anyone present in that classroom on the day it was filmed. When the segment finally shows the footage, it makes you watch the other children first, a boy who wants to work in a pet shop and another who wants to play basketball professionally, and you sit through all of it knowing that one of the children you are about to see will be different. And when Ohashi Takako appears, she is exactly as described, quiet and sincere and talking about piano and her mother and the songs she hoped to write, and then in that fraction of a second, her face does what every witness said it did, and the narration at that moment does not tell you how to feel or what it means. It simply asks whether you could see it, because if you did, you are now a witness in the same way everyone at that bar became a witness, and if you did not, the uncertainty pulls you back to watch it again. Ohashi Takako wanted people to listen to her music, and the tape sitting sealed in the ground for 10 years became the only place she still clearly existed, and the only people who ever truly paid attention to her are strangers watching a paranormal documentary decades later, rewinding a degraded recording in the dark and looking for something in her face that was never supposed to be there. She got her
Mito, Japan, 1801. Something comes up in a fishing net that nobody can put a name to.
In July of 2012, a 94-second piece of dashcam footage would completely hijack the Korean internet for almost a week straight, dividing the entire online community into two violently opposed camps, arguing about whether what they were witnessing was real or staged. The video was uploaded on July 13th with a title that roughly translates to "a ghost taken in a black box," referring to the dashcam recording device, and it shows what appears to be a completely ordinary nighttime drive through a narrow street in the Mokdong area of Seoul until something deeply unsettling starts to happen. The footage begins unremarkably enough with the typical grainy quality you'd expect from a dashcam in that era, showing the view through the windshield as someone drives slowly through what looks like a residential alley or side street at night, with the timestamp running in the corner and everything appearing totally normal for the first portion of the clip. But then the driver and their passenger, described in several Korean news reports as a woman, start to notice something strange appearing on the windshield itself, something that looks like strands of black hair somehow stuck to the glass right in front of them, even though they're inside a moving vehicle. The driver reacts the way anyone would and turns on the windshield wipers to clear away whatever this strange substance is. But when the wipers sweep across the glass, the hair-like strands don't go away at all. They just stay there clinging to the windshield as if they're not affected by the physical wipers passing over them. This is the detail that made the video work so effectively as a piece of horror content, because up until this moment, everything feels completely mundane and believable. Just two people driving at night who notice something weird on their car, and the fact that the wipers can't remove these strands creates this creeping sense that something is fundamentally wrong with what they're experiencing. The passenger suggests pulling over to check what's going on, which again feels like a totally reasonable response to this bizarre situation. So the driver starts to slow down the vehicle and begins pulling toward the side of the narrow street. The moment the car comes to a stop or gets close to stopping, the entire tone of the video shifts violently as a long-haired female figure suddenly appears right at the windshield in an abrupt reveal that comes so fast it feels like a genuine jump scare rather than something carefully choreographed for effect. The video spread through Korean online communities and social networking sites with incredible speed over the next few days, and by July 17th, just 4 days after the initial upload, the Mokdong ghost had climbed into Naver's real-time search rankings, which is significant because Naver is Korea's dominant search engine, and getting into those trending searches means the entire country is talking about something. Multiple Korean news outlets would eventually cover the phenomenon, with articles appearing in major publications trying to explain what people were arguing about and why this particular piece of footage had captured so much attention so quickly. The reason it spread so effectively was precisely because it didn't look like a typical horror short film or some obvious piece of fictional content. It looked like found footage from an ordinary person's dash cam that happened to capture something unexplainable, and that ambiguity is what made people genuinely uncertain about whether they were looking at something real or fabricated. The Korean internet split almost immediately into two distinct camps, with people arguing passionately on both sides of the authenticity debate, with one group insisting the video was obviously staged or digitally edited, while the other group defended it as potentially genuine footage of something paranormal. The people who believed it might be real pointed to specific elements of the video that seemed to support their interpretation, particularly the fact that the first 70 seconds or so don't feel like a horror production at all. They feel like authentic dashcam footage of confused people trying to figure out what's happening to their car. The detail about the hair appearing on the windshield and not being affected by the wipers felt to many viewers like the kind of strange physical interaction that would be difficult to fake convincingly. and the final reveal of the figure felt so sudden and poorly framed that some people interpreted it as something caught by accident rather than something performed deliberately for the camera. The way the clip was presented also contributed to the sense of authenticity because it wasn't uploaded as part of some established horror content creator's channel with explanations and context. It just appeared online and started spreading through shares and reposts the way genuine, unusual footage tends to spread. On the other side of the debate, skeptics pointed to several elements that suggested the video was carefully constructed rather than genuine, with Korean news articles documenting the main arguments people were making to debunk it. One of the biggest red flags people noticed was that the date stamp on the footage showed Friday the 13th, which is such an obvious horror movie trope that it seemed too convenient to be coincidental. The visual appearance of the figure that appears at the end, with its long black hair covering the face, bore a strong resemblance to well-known horror imagery from movies like The Ring, suggesting this was someone deliberately invoking familiar horror aesthetics rather than capturing something unknown. People also found it suspicious that the footage conveniently cuts off right after the reveal without showing any follow-up or aftermath, which is often a sign of staged content that ends exactly where the creators intended it to end, rather than continuing to record the way real dashcams typically would. Within days of the video reaching peak viral status, mainstream Korean media outlets began reporting on what they claimed was the true origin of the footage, and this is where the story takes an interesting turn that actually makes it more unsettling rather than less. Multiple reputable news sources, including ZDNet Korea and Asia, reported that the video was deliberately created by a viral marketing company as a demonstration of their ability to generate massive online buzz and word-of-mouth engagement. According to these reports, a marketing firm identified only as Company H admitted to creating and uploading the video, claiming it wasn't promoting any specific product, but was instead meant to showcase their capabilities in making content go viral across Korean social media. One outlet reported that someone connected to the marketing campaign had actually posted ahead of time about their plans to push the Mokdong ghost keyword into Naver's real-time search rankings, which if true would mean the entire viral spread was orchestrated from the beginning as a calculated demonstration of marketing power. But here's where things get genuinely strange in a way that keeps the door open to doubt and conspiracy thinking even after the official explanation was provided. According to Asia's reporting, when the viral marketing company told reporters about their involvement, they claimed to have posted a detailed explanation on their company blog about how and why they created the video, but this explanation post was set to private visibility, meaning ordinary people visiting the blog couldn't actually read it or verify what the company was claiming about their methods and intentions. If this really was just a harmless marketing stunt designed to demonstrate viral capability, the question becomes, why would they hide the explanation from the very public whose attention they were trying to capture and prove they could manipulate? Korean news coverage about other dashcam ghost sightings that emerged in later years, including a case covered on the SBS television show Man in Black Box, involving a ghost-like woman appearing on a road, specifically mentioned the Mokdong ghost as a precedent example of how these viral videos sometimes turn out to be staged promotional content, but even those retrospective mentions acknowledge that the format of dashcam horror has produced incidents where the line between staged content and genuine unexplained footage remains difficult to determine with absolute certainty. The culture of night fishing along the Han River in Seoul is not too different from urban fishing communities in most other major cities around the world, with local YouTubers regularly uploading their late-night sessions to document their catches and share tips about the best spots along the waterway. And many of these channels have built up dedicated followings of viewers who enjoy the peaceful, almost meditative quality of watching someone fish in the quiet darkness, with nothing but the sound of water and the glow of their equipment. On the night of July 7th, one such fishing YouTuber set up his gear down by the Han River in the Yeouido area, specifically near the National Assembly Riverside parking section, which is a popular spot that many Seoul residents would recognize as a relatively safe and well-trafficked location, even at night, and he began his typical routine of casting his line and waiting for bites while filming the session for his channel. Everything was progressing normally for the first portion of the night, with the usual sounds of the river and the occasional ripple on the water's surface. But then something caught his attention that made him initially think he'd hooked something absolutely massive on his line, some kind of fish that was big enough to create serious resistance and pull on his rod in a way that suggested real weight and power. But as he focused his attention on the dark water in front of him, he realized that what he was seeing didn't move like any fish he'd ever encountered before, and you can hear the shift in his voice on the recording as he starts to process what's actually happening out there on the river. What he described seeing was a huge, black, thick object that kept surfacing and disappearing repeatedly on the water's skin, rising up as if it was testing the air or checking its surroundings before sinking back down beneath the surface. And this pattern of appearing and vanishing continued over and over in a way that felt deliberate and controlled, rather than the erratic movements you'd expect from a struggling fish or even a group of animals swimming together. The shape wasn't moving with the current or drifting aimlessly. It seemed to be maintaining its position in roughly the same area of the river. And more unsettling than that, it appeared to be moving toward him with this steady, purposeful glide that made it clear this wasn't some inanimate object floating downstream. You can hear the panic building in the YouTuber's voice as he narrates what's happening, basically saying things like, "What is that? I'm scared. It's coming this way," as he watches this massive dark shape continue its approach, and the fear in his voice feels completely genuine rather than performed for the camera, because there's something deeply primal about watching an unidentified object of significant size moving toward you in dark water when you can't see what's underneath the surface. He estimated that the object stayed visible in that general area for approximately 20 minutes, surfacing and submerging in its strange rhythmic pattern, and during that time he was able to get a sense of its size, which he judged to be at least 6 meters long and possibly extending up to 10 meters, with a thickness that appeared greater than a human body. And at certain points during the sighting, he even got the impression that it might actually be two separate bodies moving in coordination through the dark water rather than a single creature. Eventually, the YouTuber made the decision to pack up his equipment and abandon the fishing spot entirely, which is significant because dedicated night fishers don't typically leave a good location unless they have a compelling reason to do so, and the fact that he chose to end his session and leave the area suggests he felt genuinely uncomfortable or unsafe continuing to fish with whatever this thing was moving around in the water nearby. After he uploaded the footage to his channel, the video sparked an immediate flood of reactions and theories from viewers who were trying to make sense of what the footage appeared to show, with the comment section filling up with speculation and debate about what could possibly create the movement and appearance that was captured on camera. Some viewers tried to rationalize what they were seeing by suggesting it could be a group of animals, like otters, swimming together in a formation that made them appear as one large mass, which is a reasonable enough explanation, except that people who are familiar with how otters move in water pointed out that the movement pattern and the sheer size didn't really match what you'd expect from even a large group of these animals. Other commenters started throwing out darker and more disturbing possibilities, with some suggesting it could be a released pet crocodile that had grown to significant size after being dumped in the river, which is not as far-fetched as it might sound, given that there have been documented cases in various countries of exotic pets being released into waterways where they survive and grow to alarming proportions, and people started warning about how quietly and efficiently something like a crocodile could approach before launching an attack on an unsuspecting person standing at the water's edge. The theory that generated perhaps the most concern among Korean viewers was the possibility that this could be a fully grown python or some other large constrictor snake that had either escaped captivity or been deliberately released into the Han River, because the smooth, undulating movement of the object as it surfaced and submerged did bear some resemblance to how large snakes move through water, and the idea of a massive python living in the Han River and hunting at night is the kind of urban legend that takes root in people's minds precisely because it's just plausible enough to be terrifying. What makes this sighting particularly unsettling is that none of the common explanations fully account for what the footage appears to show, because if it was just otters or other known river animals, you'd expect to see more distinct individual shapes or movements rather than this single massive dark form. And if it was debris or some kind of floating object, you wouldn't see the controlled, purposeful movement toward the fisherman's location that seems to suggest awareness and intention. The Han River runs right through the heart of Seoul and is used daily by thousands of people for recreation, fishing, and waterfront activities, which means the idea that something large and unidentified could be moving through these waters at night transforms a familiar urban space into something that suddenly feels unknown and potentially dangerous. Because once you've seen footage of something too long, rising and sinking in water that's supposed to be completely ordinary and safe, every ripple and shadow on the river's surface starts to feel like it could be hiding something making decisions underneath. We can ultimately only speculate about what this YouTuber actually encountered that night down by the Uido riverside, and whether it was a misidentified group of animals, an exotic pet that survived and grew in the wild, or something else entirely that Seoul's urban waterway is quietly harboring beneath its surface. But what's certain is that this one quiet fishing night turned into the kind of story that fundamentally changes how you look at black water after dark. In September 2008, a phone call comes into the production office of South Korea's first exorcism documentary from a daughter whose voice is trembling as she begs them to help her mother, who's been acting in ways she can't explain. The show has been running for 7 months at this point, flooded with over 2,000 reports from desperate people claiming to be tormented by supernatural forces. And while the team has managed to help many through spiritual intervention or medical treatment, some cases proved impossible to resolve and had to be abandoned completely. When the crew arrives at the house ready to document whatever might be occurring, they're immediately met with screaming from the moment they step through the door. The woman starts shouting at them, demanding to know who they are and why they're bringing ghosts into her house, ordering them to leave immediately, and her daughter tries desperately to calm her down.
아니, 아줌마가 누군데 우리 집에 들어오냐고! 귀신 데리고 들지 마! 나가!
But the mother is already spiraling into confused rambling about how something inside her keeps telling her not to eat. Whether it's a ghost or her own deteriorating mind, she genuinely can't tell anymore. And the confusion in her voice when she admits she doesn't even know if it's herself or something else controlling her is genuinely heartbreaking to witness. The daughter explains that her mother hasn't been eating or sleeping properly, and watching this decline has been unbearable. But then the mother reveals something that changes everything, mentioning casually that she's been working as a shaman for 20 years since receiving the spiritual calling at age 28, describing how she used to be incredibly talented at channeling mountain deities and fairy spirits until the clients stopped coming and everything fell apart. Right there during filming, her entire demeanor shifts in an instant and she starts demanding soju, barking orders to bring her alcohol immediately, and the daughter's reaction makes it clear this pattern repeats constantly, because every single time she refuses her mother's demands, the woman transforms into someone violent and unpredictable, physically grabbing her daughter's clothes when she tries to leave for work and demanding to know why she needs to make money, and literally blocking the doorway so she can't escape. The stress has manifested in the daughter's body as severe hair loss over 5 years, and when she tries showing the crew the bald patches by lifting her hair, her mother suddenly explodes and starts hitting her daughter's head repeatedly right there on camera, while the daughter just takes it without flinching before quietly walking to the bathroom.
나한테 보여줬잖아. 잡아. 어머니 왜 이렇게 왜? 올라와 있어.
And you can tell from her complete lack of surprise that this abuse happens every single time her mother drinks. When they ask if she remembers hitting her daughter moments ago, the mother looks genuinely baffled, insisting she would never do such a thing despite the footage clearly showing otherwise. And this complete memory blackout extends to other incidents, including when she ripped out all the feathers from her pet birds that she claims to love dearly, only discovering what she'd done when she saw them sitting there completely bare. A few days pass, and the crew returns to find the entire house destroyed with shattered glass covering every surface, and the television smashed beyond repair. And the woman attempts to explain through confusion that when these outbursts overtake her, she can't tell if she's being controlled by what she calls the alcohol ghost, or if the destruction is coming from her own psyche, admitting that even right now as they're talking, she feels overwhelming urges to smash everything around her. The daughter, who's living through this nightmare alone, simply pleads for the exorcism team to remove whatever's possessing her mother, because all she wants is to be happy again and have her real mother back instead of this violent stranger. The production team brings in a psychiatric specialist who asks about drinking habits and discovers she's consuming an entire large bottle of soju every single day. And when asked about addiction, she bristles defensively, insisting that truly addicted people maintain control, whereas she's completely lost the ability to make her own choices. But the psychiatrist's assessment is brutal, explaining she's in late-stage alcoholism, where she requires constant intake just to maintain basic daily functions and needs immediate hospitalization for 2 to 4 weeks, completely separated from alcohol. Even after hearing this professional diagnosis, the woman clings to her belief in the alcohol ghost, insisting that without some spiritual entity forcing her to drink, she simply wouldn't need alcohol at all. Recognizing she won't accept a medical explanation, the team brings in exorcist Kim Hong-gi, who performs his ritual examination and delivers a nuanced verdict, confirming that yes, the spirits legitimately came to her 20 years ago when she received her calling, and the mountain deities and fairy spirits she channels are real presences that entered with genuine purpose. But the problem is, these spirits absolutely do not approve of alcohol or tobacco, so when she began drinking heavily every day, they became dissatisfied. The exorcist explains that when someone's constantly intoxicated, they become unable to properly channel spiritual messages or fulfill their role as a shaman, so the vacuum left by departing spirits has been filled by escalating alcohol dependency. But this isn't demonic possession or malevolent entities tormenting her from outside, rather legitimate spirits that entered correctly but abandoned her due to her own self-destructive behavior. And his advice is brutally simple: quit drinking immediately and return to serving the spirits properly by helping people and living with the dignity that role demands. For years, Park Mi-hyuk genuinely believed her alcohol cravings stemmed from supernatural forces, an alcohol demon compelling her to drink and destroy her life. But the truth was, she'd been tormenting herself and her daughter all along and desperately needed medical treatment for severe dependency rather than spiritual intervention. And this case represented exactly why the show sometimes had to walk away from investigations that initially appeared supernatural but turned out to be purely medical conditions. But not every abandoned case had such a clear-cut explanation, and the production team's second major failure that year involved something far more disturbing, a situation so ambiguous that even now nobody can definitively say whether they were dealing with mental illness or genuine possession. This case involved a woman who transformed completely in 30 days, changing so dramatically her children reported their loving mother had become violently aggressive toward everyone, including family, and she began elaborate conversations with entities no one else could see, as if invisible people were standing right there beside them. When the crew attempted visiting, they found the door locked, and although they heard movement inside, she refused to respond, forcing them to call her son, who helped gain entry, only to discover she'd barricaded herself in the bathroom, rejecting all communication. And when they finally breached the door, she emerged hostile, shouting at the cameras and throwing objects while her children struggled unsuccessfully to restrain her increasingly erratic behavior, leaving the crew no choice but to abandon their efforts, completely unsuccessful, after hours of failed dialogue attempts. Her son explained it began with a phone call saying something felt wrong with her body, which led them to fear cancer, but hospital tests came back completely normal with no physiological explanation, and when he visited that evening, he was shocked by her weight loss and deteriorated appearance, while she kept insisting ghosts were surrounding her, describing how she'd be engaged in normal conversation when suddenly her attention would drift and she'd start talking to invisible entities, arguing and laughing and cursing with such conviction, it genuinely appeared she was interacting with real people standing right beside them. Her daughter said it no longer felt like living with her mother, but rather some different person who'd taken over her body, expressing desperate wishes for things to return to normal. Every subsequent attempt at communication resulted in escalating violence, and even when they arranged for close friends to visit thinking familiar faces might break through, she attacked them physically, just as she had the crew and her own family, treating people she'd known intimately for years as dangerous strangers who needed to be driven away. So the team decided, with family consent, to install CCTV cameras in 3 locations: the bathroom where she spent hours alone, the hallway to monitor escape attempts, and the living room where she conducted bizarre one-sided conversations. The bathroom footage showed her sitting in complete darkness for over an hour, muttering fragmented phrases about not being able to remember and not knowing what's happening, while appearing to argue with invisible people about being hurt and complaining about someone in traditional hanbok, raising disturbing questions about who she was perceiving in that darkened space. The living room camera captured conversations on larger scale, with the family estimating she seemed to interact with 10 or more different voices, frequently bringing up her deceased stepfather with whom she'd maintained a terrible relationship, shouting accusations at empty air about who had truly been tormenting whom, and perhaps most eerily, the hallway camera caught her leaving at 1 a.m. to stand outside in darkness as if waiting for arrivals, then returning inside and thanking invisible people for the fun time they had together and wishing them good night as though she'd finished spending time with actual people, except cameras showed conclusively she'd been standing there completely alone with no one anywhere near the property. Her son could barely articulate his confusion, admitting he had no idea who these people were she claimed to talk to or why his mother had transformed so fundamentally, and the family was disintegrating watching this woman who used to shower her children with endless love become someone they barely recognized and frankly feared. The production crew confronted a case defying easy solutions, something far more complex than standard exorcism or psychiatric diagnosis could resolve, existing in that terrifying, ambiguous space between mental illness and potentially genuine supernatural phenomena where boundaries blur and certainty becomes impossible. 2 families and 2 completely different outcomes. Park Mi-hyuk's story revealed that sometimes what people believe to be demonic possession is actually severe medical dependency requiring hospitalization rather than holy water, while the second woman's case showed that some situations exist beyond our current understanding where even experts with decades of experience can't agree on what they're witnessing. The uncomfortable reality that sometimes there are no solutions, no explanations, just people trapped in situations that defy everything we think we understand about the world, left wondering whether they're fighting demons or their own minds, or something else entirely that exists in the shadows between both. There is a YouTube channel out of Japan called Fake Documentary Q, created by a team led by Daichi Minaguchi, and since its first upload on August 21st, 2021, it has grown to nearly 400,000 subscribers with over 30 videos ranging from 7 minutes to just under 40. Every single one is free with high-quality English subtitles, and the last upload went live on September 20th, 2025, meaning it has been roughly 7 months of silence. Each video is a fully produced horror short film disguised as a documentary segment, and the disguise is so convincing that if you stumbled onto one of these without context, you would genuinely not know whether what you were watching was real. Viewers have also been mapping connections between episodes for years now, recurring symbols, reversed imagery, overlapping characters, and what might be a much larger mythology underneath everything, and whether that's intentional or just an audience reading too deep is honestly part of what makes this channel impossible to stop thinking about. The best way to understand what this channel does is to look at where it started and where it ended up. The first upload, Cursed Video, runs about 18 minutes. A two-person documentary crew is investigating online rumors from around 2005 to 2009 about a VHS tape that kills anyone who watches it. Standard Ringu territory, and the show knows this because when they ask a video store clerk about the tape, he literally asks them if they're looking for the ring. I love that moment because it immediately tells you this series respects the audience enough to not pretend you've never heard of a cursed videotape before, and instead of dancing around the trope, it walks straight through it. The store manager confirms the tape exists, and after 30 minutes of digging, pulls out a VHS with a handwritten sticker warning, "It will kill you," a sticker he wrote himself and admits to with a smile. And when they finally watch the tape, nothing about it is what you'd expect. There's no disturbing imagery or nightmarish faces, just pleasant footage of a couple spending time together with framed memorial portraits of deceased individuals spliced in at random intervals. Not graphic, not horrifying, just deeply wrong in a way that takes a second to register. And I think that's more unsettling than any Ring-style montage could have been, because it makes you feel like you're watching something personal that you weren't supposed to find. The manager explains that kids added the extra portraits over time as a joke, which turns the tape into this collaborative object where nobody can trace what's original and what was added later. The crew concludes it was all a hoax, and this is where the show does what would become its signature move. A narrator explains that the segment never aired because the director died in a car accident and the cameraman died of heart failure despite being in his 30s, and the footage was locked in storage until now. Then the show plays the tape one more time, and this time there are 4 portraits instead of 3, even though the crew only counted 3 at the store. Whose face is the 4th one? Did the tape change? The show gives you nothing, just cuts to black and lets you sit there. And that feeling, that specific discomfort of being given just enough to build a theory but never enough to confirm it, is what every single episode of this channel runs on. I went in expecting jump scares or at least some kind of reveal, and instead I got something way worse, which is a question I can't answer and can't stop turning over in my head. Now compare that to the most recent upload, Helter Skelter, from September 2025, and the gap in ambition is staggering. It opens with a young woman going through storage boxes left behind by her late mother, who ran a small Vietnamese import shop from 2005 until her death in 2018. She pulls out a package wrapped in paper covered in Chinese characters, which makes no sense because the shop imported from Vietnam and the package has never been opened. Then she pulls out the store ledger and starts going through her mother's accounting. And this is where I realized this series had gotten significantly better since the first episode, because what follows is one of the most effective horror sequences I've seen, and there isn't a single supernatural element in it. Normal monthly supply costs for the shop were about 300,000 yen, but payments to something called VTC show transfers of 1.37 million, 1.74 million, and in 1 month, 3.53 million yen. And every single month after a VTC purchase, sales spike massively, with one example being a 1.74 million yen purchase, followed by over 7 million in sales. The daughter just presents the numbers and lets them sit, and watching it, I felt this slow crawl of understanding that whatever her mother was buying was not merchandise, and the show trusted me to get there on my own without spelling it out. Turning a store ledger into something that makes your stomach drop is genuinely impressive filmmaking. Then a mini DV tape is found and played, and this is where things leave the financial mystery behind entirely. 2 men enter a house, one named Hai and a hired cameraman. Hai tells the cameraman to record everything as proof, though proof for whom is never stated. What follows is a ritual where Hai puts on gloves before handling objects, replaces items on a table with wrapped artifacts from his bag, positions mirrors at specific spots, and has the cameraman document everything. The detail that changed the entire video for me on a second viewing is that Hai wears gloves the whole time, but the cameraman touches everything with his bare hands, and nobody says a word about it. The first time through, I didn't notice because the scene keeps your eyes on the objects, but on rewatch that asymmetry is all I could see, because Hui isn't protecting his partner, he's insulating himself from what his partner is about to become. After the ritual, Hui vanishes and a voice starts repeating from upstairs in a flat loop. The subtitles translate it as "excuse me," but Vietnamese-speaking viewers in the comments corrected this, explaining the voice is saying "Ko I O N Ha Kong," which means "is anyone home?" In Vietnamese spiritual custom, you say this when entering an unfamiliar space to let any residing spirits know you're there so they can leave. But in this scene, the entity is the one asking, and the cameraman is the one who gets displaced. That inversion hit me harder than any jump scare in any horror film I've watched this year, because the logic of it is so clean and so cruel at the same time. Hui's voice returns, calm and completely unsurprised, guiding the cameraman to breathe slowly, step back, and hand over the camera. The cameraman screams, the camera changes hands, and he's gone. Before Hui leaves, the family portrait on the mantle has changed from smiling to either neutral or blacked out, and when he tilts the camera up to the upstairs window, the cameraman is now standing there, staring vacantly outward in the same posture as the figure that was in that window when they first arrived. The show doesn't acknowledge any of this. No music, no narration, just holds the shot for a few seconds and walks away, and I sat there genuinely unsure whether I'd just seen what I thought I saw or if I was reading into it, which is exactly the state of mind this series wants you in at all times. The daughter opens the wrapped package. Inside is a yellow backpack stained with what appears to be dried blood. She has no idea what it is or why her mother paid a fortune for it, and the video ends without a word of explanation. The distance between Cursed Video and Helter Skelter tells you everything about how this team has grown. The first episode is a clever short with one clean twist, and the latest is a layered horror story running across financial mystery, ritual horror, and metaphysical nightmare at the same time, ending not on a twist, but on an image that makes you want to re-watch the entire channel from the beginning. The creators have clearly gotten sharper, layering accounting records, mini DV footage, Vietnamese spiritual customs, and visual details that only land on a second viewing. And the whole thing works because it never once tells you what to think. If you've never heard of this channel, the entire catalog is on YouTube right now with English subtitles, and it costs nothing. And if enough of you are interested, I would love to do a full deep dive on the individual episodes, so let me know in the comments if that's something you'd want to see. Somewhere in a quiet Japanese neighborhood on September 15th, 1990, a middle school boy is messing around with a home video camera in his living room. He's figured out the stop motion trick where you hit record, strike a pose, stop the tape, move to a different spot, and hit record again. So when you play it back, it looks like you're teleporting around the room, the kind of thing every kid with a camcorder figured out eventually. His friend is standing in the next room, jumping and posing while the camera sits on a table, and the boy is toggling the record button on and off to get that choppy disappearing effect. Nobody is watching the viewfinder, and nobody is paying attention to what the camera is actually capturing. And that's the whole point of what makes this footage so unsettling, because in the upper right corner of the frame, just past the curtain near a glass door, a face slides into view. It's pale, it's male, it appears to be enormous compared to the boy in the shot, and it moves laterally into the frame in a way that looks almost mechanical, like it's being pulled on a track. It's there for maybe 2 seconds, and then it's gone, and neither of the kids in the room noticed it at the time because they weren't looking at the screen. They only found it later when they played the tape back. 6 months after that tape was recorded, on March 28, 1991, Nippon Television aired a paranormal special under their Thursday special programming block called Emergency Report. These are the world's strange phenomena. It was hosted by Mino Monta, one of the most recognizable television personalities in Japan at the time, alongside announcer Nagai Minako, with a studio panel that included Sugimoto Aya and Kato Reiko. The show covered the usual spread of early 90s paranormal content like the lake monster Ogopogo, crop circles, that sort of thing, but the segment that would go on to define the entire broadcast, and the one that an entire generation of Japanese viewers would never forget, was the home video with the face. The show played the clip for the studio audience, and the reaction was exactly what you'd expect: screaming, gasping, people physically recoiling in their seats. Mino Manta had been building it up before the commercial break, teasing that this footage might actually curse the viewer just by watching it, and whether that was a joke or not, it did its job. The clip was terrifying in a way that felt distinctly different from the polished ghost stories people were used to seeing on television. This wasn't a horror movie, and it wasn't a recreation. It was a kid's home video with a date stamp in the corner, shot in a completely ordinary living room in a completely ordinary house, and something was in it that shouldn't have been there. But the show didn't just air the clip and move on. They investigated it, and that investigation is honestly what elevated the whole thing from a creepy clip into something that stuck with people for decades. The production team brought the footage to a company called Piasu, which specialized in computer image analysis. This was 1991, so the tools were primitive by modern standards, but they ran the tape through everything they had. They isolated the face, compared its size to the boy's face in the shot, and found that the mysterious face was roughly 1.5 times larger than a normal human head at that distance. They adjusted the color grading across 30 different levels and mapped the lighting direction, confirming that the face was being lit by the same light source as the rest of the room, meaning it hadn't been composited or spliced in after the fact. Then they rendered a rudimentary 3-dimensional model of the face based on brightness values and found that it had genuine depth, a raised nose, contoured cheeks, and that below the neck there was nothing, just a face floating in space. Their conclusion was careful but definitive in its own way. The face was present in the room at the time of filming. It was 3-dimensional, it was not a composite or an edit, and they could not explain what it was. After that, the show's crew went to the house where the video had been filmed. It was a quiet, residential home in an unremarkable neighborhood, nothing unusual about it in any way. They interviewed the boy who shot the footage, identified only as A-kun to protect his identity, and he explained exactly what I described earlier. He'd been playing with the camera's stop-motion function with his friend. He wasn't watching the screen, and he only discovered the face when he reviewed the tape afterward. Then they tried to recreate it. They tested every plausible explanation they could think of. First, they checked whether someone could have been standing outside the window at the right height, and found that you'd need a stepladder to get your face level with the spot where it appeared, and even then, a normal human face was far too small to match what was on the tape. Then they tested whether someone could have held up an enlarged photograph in front of the window, but the 3-dimensional analysis from Piasu ruled that out because the face had depth and contour that a flat image couldn't produce. Then they considered the most practical option, that the friend, identified as B-kun, might have leaned out from behind a wall or a nearby mirror during the filming. The timing technically could have lined up since B-kun had been moving around between takes, but the issue was that if he'd leaned out naturally, his clothing and body would have been visible in the frame as well, and only a bare face appeared. To position yourself so that only your face was visible at that angle would have required an extremely awkward and deliberate posture, the kind you would absolutely remember doing, and B-kun said he had no memory of it. The show's final position was essentially that they could not debunk the footage. They couldn't prove it was paranormal either, but every practical explanation they tested fell short in one way or another. The face was too big, too 3-dimensional, and too cleanly isolated from any body to be easily explained away. What happened after that initial broadcast is interesting in its own right. The clip, which fans eventually nicknamed Kao NU, roughly meaning the face sliding in, was replayed on Japanese paranormal programming at least 3 more times over the following decade, appearing on both Nippon TV and TBS shows including USO Japan in the early 2000s. Each time it resurfaced, it brought with it a new wave of viewers who were seeing it for the first time, and each time it hit just as hard. Internet forums in the mid-2000s would go on to debate whether there might actually be a second, different version of the footage that people were remembering, a kind of collective false memory, or possibly a genuinely separate clip that was filmed under similar circumstances and has since been lost. That debate was never fully resolved, and it added an extra layer of unease to something that was already deeply uncomfortable to watch. The face in the footage was often compared by viewers to the Japanese actor Furuya Masato, though whether that resemblance means anything or is just a coincidence of lighting and angle is anyone's guess. What makes Kao NYU endure isn't the face itself, as unnerving as it is, but the context around it, the fact that it was filmed by accident accident by a child who wasn't trying to capture anything in a room where nothing was supposed to be happening, and that when professionals sat down and tried to figure out what went wrong, they couldn't. In 2009, a piece of footage started circulating on YouTube that most people mistook for an actual documentary about a Japanese family. And what makes this so disturbing is that even after you realize it's not real, there are things hidden in this footage that will make your skin crawl. Things the filmmakers never directly show you, but are right there in the frame waiting for someone to notice. The footage is presented as a documentary by a Western filmmaker named Veronica Addison, who's documenting large families in Japan because of the country's declining birth rate, and the production quality is intentionally bad with cheap graphics and awkward narration that makes it feel like something you'd stumble across on public access television. She's following the Yura family, which consists of a mother, a stepfather, and 7 children, and from the first breakfast scene, you can tell something is fundamentally wrong beyond normal dysfunction. The stepfather is 39, but the eldest daughter is 24, which means he only recently joined this family, and we learn the biological father disappeared 7 years ago with no explanation about what happened or whether anyone investigated. There's a shrine in the background with a photo that you assume is for the missing father, but nobody addresses it, and during this first meal, the 16-year-old daughter Ria violently attacks the stepfather, and nobody stops her except the mother, while the rest of the family just continues eating like this is completely normal. Then we discover the eldest son, Guki, who's 23, is a shut-in who never leaves his room, and his mother brings him meals through a barely open door, and when you get brief glimpses inside, his walls are covered with calligraphy and writing nobody explains. We also learn the eldest daughter, Ringo, who's 25, left for Tokyo 3 years ago, but nobody's contacted her for 6 months, and the stepfather finds her working at an escort service under the stage name Apple, which matters because Ringo literally means apple in Japanese. The stepfather brings Ringo home by paying off a $50,000 debt, and this is presented as heartwarming. But around the same time, the 17-year-old son, Ryuta, falls from the 2nd story and ends up hospitalized with a serious head injury. One of the younger children mentions another sibling, Ron, had a similar accident the year before, and then we find out another child named Takaharu drowned at age 9. So this family has had an unusual amount of tragic accidents and deaths and disappearances. The documentary shifts into talking about how the family believes their house is cursed because of a ghost photograph, and that all their misfortune is paranormal, and Veronica seems to buy this supernatural explanation completely. But if you actually pay attention to what's happening in the background of certain scenes, there are things that suggest something far worse than any ghost story, things the documentary never highlights but are just sitting there in the frame for anyone observant enough to catch. Then there's the scene where Ryuta falls from the 2nd floor, and if you watch the window in the background very carefully for just a split second, you can see the mother standing there right after he falls, watching him on the ground. And the implication is absolutely chilling because it suggests she might have pushed him out that window. There are shots of fruit baskets with knives stabbed into them appearing multiple times throughout the documentary, and nobody ever explains what they mean. But the first time you see this basket, there are 2 knives, one stuck into a lemon and another stuck into a dragon fruit. This matters because one of the children is named Remon, which is the Japanese loanword for lemon, and another child is named Ryota, which can be spelled with kanji characters that can also be read as dragon. So these pieces of fruit with knives stuck in them are basically symbolic targets, showing which family members might be next on the mother's list. When you see this same basket appear again later in the documentary, there are even more knives stuck into different fruits, and you start to realize this is the mother's way of marking her next victims. There are extended shots of the mother tending her vegetable garden with this permanent frozen smile that looks completely unnatural, and at one point she screams at children for playing near it, telling them she doesn't care if they go missing. One child mentions their dead cat Enrique was buried in that garden, but people analyzing this footage believe the missing father is probably buried there too, which explains why the mother is so protective of that area and refuses to move houses even when the stepfather suggests it. There's also this detail about insurance, where a younger child doing homework says his mother is always talking about life insurance, and we know after 7 years the missing husband was declared legally dead, which let the mother collect his insurance and remarry. The stepfather wants to use this insurance money to move, but the mother is strongly against it, and if you have a body buried in your garden, you're obviously going to want to stay put. Ringo is filmed multiple times adding powder to food served specifically to the stepfather, and a younger child mentions this dish was a favorite of both the previous husband and the cat, Enrique, who are both now dead, and when this child brings this up, the mother immediately cuts him off. Later, you see Ringo whispering something to her shut-in brother Gookie that the camera can't pick up. And shortly after Gookie finally leaves his room to go on a family camping trip, which is where the mother has her accident falling off a cliff into a coma. Gookie's wall calligraphy includes messages that can be read as either mother is the best or mom is psycho, depending on interpretation. And at the end, Veronica says, the Yura family is psycho, which could be Japanese slang for awesome, or her actual English opinion that this family is mentally disturbed. The film never clarifies which meaning is intended. The prevailing theory is the mother killed her first husband for insurance money and buried him in the garden and has been systematically trying to kill off some children to collect more payouts, and some older children, particularly Ringo and Gookie, have figured this out and are either helping her or trying to stop her. The stepfather appears genuinely good, with no idea what family he married into, and by the end has likely been slowly poisoned by Ringo's food. But the documentary also presents the paranormal explanation with the cursed photograph and ghost haunting, and technically nothing definitively proves the supernatural isn't the real cause. The film is deliberately constructed so you can interpret it either way, depending on what details you focus on, and this ambiguity is what makes it so unsettling because you're never given a clear answer. What makes this footage so effective and so disturbing is that none of these sinister details are ever directly pointed out or explained to the viewer. There are no jump scares or sudden zoom-ins or red circles highlighting the mother lurking in the background or standing in windows right after accidents happen. The filmmakers just let all of this horrifying subtext sit there in the frame, trusting that some viewers will eventually notice these details. People watching this for the first time usually think it's just a weird documentary about a dysfunctional family, but then they read comments or watch it again looking for hidden details and suddenly realize they were watching something much darker than they understood. That delayed realization that you missed all these sinister things happening right in front of you is what makes this footage stick with people long after finishing it, and why this obscure mockumentary from 2009 still gets talked about and analyzed years later by people trying to figure out what they actually saw.
Before we get into this one, quick heads up. I covered the sequel to this film back in Volume 1 of Horrors of the Japanese Internet, so if you've seen that, you already know this family. If you haven't, go watch it. But here's the one-paragraph version. The sequel is a fake documentary called Psycho, The Large Family, fronted by a Canadian filmmaker named Veronica Addison, who comes to Japan to make a wholesome piece about a big family bucking the country's collapsing birth rate. There's a gentle stepfather who married a widow whose first husband vanished 7 years earlier, and he spends the film slowly winning her kids over. The movie hands you a cursed ghost photo as the reason misfortune keeps hitting them, but that's the cover story. Buried in the background, never pointed at, is the real one. The mother is almost certainly a serial insurance killer. The first husband is under the vegetable gardens she won't let anyone dig in, declared legally dead after 7 years so she could collect. The kids' endless accidents, and a special dish quietly reserved for the men she's finished with. The film even closes on the mother herself in a coma after slipping off a cliff, leaving you to wonder whether it was finally her turn. That was Volume 1. This case is the chapter that comes before all of it. This is Banned from Broadcast 2, The Cursed Large Family, from 2003. Part of a Fuji TV series called Hosokinchi that ran through the 2000s. Every episode is presented as a documentary that got made and then banned from airing. because somewhere in the footage there's a truth too disturbing to broadcast. The show buries the real story in the background of shots, in things people say offhand, in stuff the camera catches but never points at, and then ends by putting text on screen. Were you able to see the truth? This file and the Psycho feature that follows it were both directed by Toshikazu Nagai, which is why the two chapters play like one long con with a single hand behind them. So here's the documentary you're being shown. A film crew profiles the Ura family. Big, cheerful household. The dad, Keiichiro, has been out of work for 2 years since he fell off a ladder on the job. The mom, Tsukasa, 7 kids, and a cat named Enrique. And the crew films the wholesome version. Morning radio calisthenics, everyone eating breakfast together, a special beef dish that's reserved just for dad, kids running around. If you've ever seen one of these Japanese big family docs, you know the voice. Huge families, not much money, a narrator cooing about how they get through it all on love and spirit. This film copies that voice exactly. The narration stays sweet and upbeat the whole way through. And then the cracks. The kids keep getting hurt. One daughter's eye swells up. The youngest keeps falling. And you learn the family already lost a child, a son, Takaharu, drowned in a nearby river the year before. There's a photograph, a picture of a torii gate, that keeps turning up in the mailbox. They throw it away. It comes back. They destroy it. It comes back. And it showed up 4 days before Takaharu died. Dad flies into violent rages at the eldest daughter, Ringo, hurling his bowl across the room and going at her. And then when it's over, he sits back down and says everything's fine, as if it never happened. They bring in a psychic, who calls the photo a portal for evil spirits. They do an exorcism. Dad's conveniently not there for it. That word the narrator keeps using, falling, is to tell. The youngest is always falling. It's the word adults reach for when they don't want to say what actually happened to a child, and the documentary lets it sit there uncorrected, sweet narrator and all. Then Dad vanishes. A second psychic examines the photo, counts the figures in it, lands on 6, and suggests that Keiichiro himself is now trapped inside the image. The family gets happier after he's gone. The injuries stop, and in the last stretch, the camera wanders into the children's bedroom and lingers on the drawings scattered across the floor, because there's no ghost. Read the drawings and the real story comes apart in your hands. One shows the mother pushing the ladder while the father's up on it. That workplace accident that put him out of work for 2 years was an attempt on his life that didn't take. Another shows the father pushing someone into a river. That's how Takaharu really drowned. His father killed him. More drawings show the mother and the eldest daughter putting something into the food, and it's seeded earlier, quietly, that Ringo wants to study pharmacy and Mom used to be a nurse. So the family had the knowledge and the access, and there's a special beef dish that only Dad eats. And one drawing shows the mother holding a stack of the cursed ghost photos, with a note that there are no ghosts at all. She was planting a fresh copy every time one got destroyed. She built the haunting. There's more in the drawings. The elder son, Goki, hitting the father with a bat. None of it is narrated. The film never says a word about any of it. It leaves it lying on the floor in crayon and waits to see if you were paying attention. Wave the curse in your face. The photo that won't stay gone. The exorcism, the portal, 6 figures in the image, so you never look down at the drawings. Banned from broadcast sells itself as footage too disturbing to air. You spend the whole runtime assuming the unbroadcastable thing is the ghost, the curse, the portal. It isn't. The thing that couldn't be shown is a house where the parents took turns trying to kill each other, and the children, where a child got pushed into a river, and where none of the adults holding the camera noticed or wanted to. The scandal was a family, and everyone who filmed them and looked away. Japan has a real recurring true crime pattern that this film sits on top of. The most infamous case broke in 1998 when a woman named Masumi Hayashi laced a pot of communal curry at a neighborhood summer festival in Wakayama with arsenic. 4 people died, including a 10-year-old and a teenager, and more than 60 were hospitalized. What surfaced afterward was worse than the curry. Hayashi was a former life insurance saleswoman, and she and her husband were tied to a string of insurance fraud schemes and attempted murder by poison charges over the previous decade, including on her own husband. Using arsenic her husband could get his hands on easily as an exterminator. A suburban housewife, a big family, insurance money, and food as the weapon. They just moved it all into one house, buried it under a ghost photo, and dared you to keep watching the photo instead of the mother. And it gets worse in the sequel, the one I summarized up top, which is why the order matters. That's where a lot of Western viewers came in, meeting this family in English first, introduced by Veronica Addison's wholesome public broadcaster warmth, and only later finding the older, all-Japanese chapter that comes before it. Her narration keeps that bland, hopeful documentary tone right up to the ending. The family on a happy fishing trip. Mom recovering from an accident in the hospital. She has no idea what she filmed. And the sequel's title is a filthy little pun. Psycho. Written one way, it means the greatest, the best, top of the heap, which is exactly how you title a warm documentary about a wonderful big family. Written another way, it's just Psycho. The title tells you what the movie is out loud, and the movie still gets away with hiding it from you. Put the two films together, and it's not a haunting at all. It's a woman who removed one abusive man, and somewhere in the years between the two documentaries, quietly became the thing she removed. The abuse doesn't end when the abuser's gone, it changes hands. The cursed Tori photo appeared on Unbelievable, the same Fuji TV show that chased Sugisawa. Fans traced the real source, cheap ghost photos from a gachapon vending machine. The mother bought a stack and used them as props. In Japan's idol industry, the product is the girl. She gets packaged, promoted, and sold, and the people who build the music around her, the composers, the arrangers, the lyricists, stay out of frame. Nobody asks who they are. Nobody needs to. Psychic Vision Jaganrei from 1988 is built on that silence. Directed by Teruyoshi Ishii, written by Chiaki Konaka, 49 minutes, shot on videotape. Presented as the behind-the-scenes TV documentary that was never aired. The lead is Emi Sato, a real idol of the era playing a fictional one with the same first name. The tape grain, the flat lighting, the dead studio air. It reads as real 1988 television, not a movie. The cursed song in it is called Lovecraft, and the film was written by a guy steeped in weird and cosmic fiction. That spelling isn't an accident. A reporter named Kyoko Sawai is filming Emi Kato, a teen idol preparing to release her new single, a song called Lovecraft. She follows the production meetings, the arranger Ida building the track on a computer, Emi's vocal coach Honda drilling her on breathing, style sessions, Emi visiting record shops to put up posters and watching her music get switched off the second she leaves. Kawanishi, the producer running the campaign, won't say who composed the song. And then the edges start going wrong. There's a face at the side of the frame that shouldn't be there. Then a woman in white standing at the back of an interview shot, silent, present, gone. Noises bleed into the recording studio during the mixdown that nobody can identify. A lighting rig comes down and nearly kills Emi. The director of the music video dies in a sudden explosion. Up in the studio rafters, barely visible, a deformed face. Kyoko keeps having episodes. Brief attacks where she acts confused, says things she doesn't remember. None of it gets lingered on. The camera catches the wrong thing and moves on. Kyoko starts pulling the thread. The arranger says he doesn't know who wrote the song. Kawanishi had it stocked away from an old contest submission years ago. It didn't win, but he liked it and kept it. The contest magazine where it was supposedly published doesn't list the song anywhere. The crew starts asking Kawanishi directly, and he won't answer. They track down a man named Yamagishi, who seems to know something and won't talk on camera. He hands them a tape and says, "Look at this." Shortly after, Yamagishi is in a car accident, attributed to a vehicle defect. When they go back through their own footage, they find her, the woman from the tape. She's in the background of the interview shots. She's standing behind Kawanishi in the meeting footage, frame after frame, and nobody on set noticed. The original composer killed herself 7 years earlier, jumping from the building they're standing next to. and the confrontation that follows is the ugliest thing in the film. Someone addresses the ghost directly, telling her she doesn't have the right to go this far, asking why she didn't tell Kawanishi she was pregnant, and then saying the child wasn't even his. The song is hers. That much is acknowledged out loud, but the rest is a mess of a relationship and a pregnancy and a woman who jumped, and the film leaves it tangled on purpose. What's clear is that Kawanishi took her song, sat on it for years, and is now selling it under somebody else's name, and whatever came back isn't going to let that happen quietly. Konaka went on to write Serial Experiments Lane, Hellsing, Digimon Tamers, a stack of J-horror scripts. His horror keeps coming back to the same nerve. Screens as doorways, recordings that carry something, reality thinning out wherever technology gets thick. Jaganrei is the first place you can see him work it. Jaganrei is frequently called one of Japan's earliest found-footage horror films, and the dates back it up. A year ahead of the McPherson tape and UFO abduction, both 1989. 4 years before the BBC's Ghostwatch, and its climax, where the ghost tears through the studio mid-shoot, plays close to Ghostwatch's ending, a spirit wrecking a broadcast from inside the machinery of television, except this came first, a full decade before the Blair Witch Project. The idea that a recording can carry a curse, that the camera transmits the supernatural instead of just recording it, became the entire engine of J-horror. Ringu's cursed videotape is a direct descendant. For years, almost nobody outside Japan had seen it. No official release abroad, just bad bootlegs with garbage subtitles, until a 2023 documentary called The J-Horror Virus framed it as what it is. Now the part to handle carefully because it's real. On April 8, 1986, jumping from the roof of her management agency's building in Tokyo. She was 18. Her death was followed by a wave of copycat deaths among young fans, dark enough that it got its own name in the press. Jaganrei was made 2 years after that. Films reacting to her death and to the industry that produced and then lost her. Underneath the ghost story, Jaganrei is an angry film about the idol business. There's a scene where an industry insider describes idols on camera as a product, a factory that mass produces girls, wrings the money out of them, and throws them away when they stop being profitable. Ghost songwriters, plagiarism, things even people inside the business say they don't know about. The woman the system used up and discarded comes back through the exact thing it tried to sell. The song. And the studio catches fire. It's the same wound that would feed Perfect Blue a decade later, an idol coming apart under the weight of the image built on top of her. Jaganrei got there first, rougher and closer to the actual event. This one's different from the rest. It's not a mockumentary or a fake investigation, it's a Japanese horror short, maybe 10 minutes, and it runs on 3 ideas from Japanese folk belief. The first is the onryo, the vengeful ghost, a woman who died violently or wrongfully, pale skin, long black hair over the face, that slow crawl across the floor. It's the template Sadako and Kayako came from, the single most recognizable figure in Japanese horror. The second is mirin, lingering attachment, the belief that a soul who died still holding on to something in this world can't pass on. Love, grief, a grudge, an object. The attachment keeps them here. The third is kuyo, a memorial rite, the Buddhist practice of comforting and releasing a spirit, not by force but by sincerity. You don't beat the ghost, you pray for her, and mean it, and that lets her go. A girl named Keiko found an earring near a temple. Beautiful thing, a red stone like a ruby, oval, set in gold. She should not have picked it up. For 2 weeks, she's been trying to get rid of it. She throws it in the trash. It's back on her desk the next day. She throws it away again, back on the desk. She asks her mom if she's been moving it. Her mom hasn't touched it. And Keiko is so scared of being alone with this thing that she begs her friend Masayo to come sleep over, just so she isn't in the room by herself when it happens. Because it happens around midnight, and Keiko warns her, "You're going to hear funny noises, and when you do not open your eyes. Do not get out of bed." They do normal sleepover stuff. There's a call to a boy on one of those big old cordless phones. There's a tin can and string toy that's broken. Small, dated, domestic. And then it's midnight, and the room goes black except for a faint glow coming off the earring on the desk. Masayo wakes up and can't move. There's a woman in the room, pale, blood running down from a wound in her head. The kind you don't survive. She's in a light green dress, and she's got a single red earring in her left ear, the match to the one Keiko found. And she's crawling, hair over her face, moving wrong, coming across the floor. Masayo hides and makes it to morning without opening her eyes all the way, and survives. And in the daylight, both girls realize something. The ghost wasn't after them. She wasn't angry. She was looking for her earring, the other half of the pair. That was all she wanted. They take it to a priest at the temple, and he recognizes it. It belonged to a young woman who jumped to her death not long ago from an apartment building nearby, after a bad fight with the man she loved, the man who probably gave her those earrings in the first place. She died with something unfinished, and it kept her here. The priest promises to hold a memorial service for her, and the girls go to the building where she died, and they leave flowers, and they pray. And there's one last image of her falling, her worst moment playing through one more time, and then it's done. Which is why this one goes here between the fakes. That crawling woman with the hair over her face, that's the Onryo, the vengeful ghost, the single most iconic figure in all of Japanese horror. Same archetype as Sadako from Ringu, same as Kayako from Ju-on. A young woman, a violent or wrong death, pale skin, long black hair hiding the face, that slow, unnatural movement. Your brain has been trained by decades of these movies to see that shape and know it's here to kill you. And the whole short uses that against you. It builds a textbook Onryo attack, gets your body ready for it, and then tells you the monster is a heartbroken woman who lost an earring and wants it back. The reason throwing it away never worked is the belief underneath this. Mirin. Lingering attachment. Unfinished business. The idea in this Buddha-tinged tradition is that a soul that dies still clutching something can't move on. It stays tied to the thing or the place. And her attachment isn't in the earring, it's in her. The earring's just the anchor. So of course you can't get rid of it by tossing the object. The object was never the problem. And the way it resolves isn't an exorcism. Nobody banishes anything. What fixes it is kuyo, a memorial service, the Buddhist practice of comforting and releasing a spirit. And the short makes a sharp point about it. Masayo notes that a real memorial isn't the ritual object or the burning of the earring, it's what's in your heart, the sincerity of the prayer. Intention over mechanism. You don't beat this ghost. You lay flowers for a stranger who died alone and unloved, and you mean it. And that lets her go. 4 of the 5 stories here are about fabrication. Fake villages, staged monsters, planted photos, cursed products built to fool you. This one's the opposite. 2 teenagers, some flowers, and meaning it.
In Russia, dash cams are not optional. They are survival equipment. Drivers run them because insurance fraud is rampant, traffic disputes get ugly fast, and without footage, you have essentially nothing to stand on. Most of the time, these cameras capture nothing interesting. Gray roads, wet weather, routine commutes. But on one particular morning, at one particular intersection in Moscow, a dash cam captured something that ended up confusing millions of people across the entire internet. And the reason it confused them is because what it appears to show is genuinely impossible. The clip is just under 2 minutes long and starts completely normally. The dash cam car is sitting behind another vehicle at a large urban intersection waiting for the light. The car directly in front is a dark BMW. Traffic begins moving. The BMW starts its turn through the junction, and everything looks exactly like a wet Russian morning commute should look. Unremarkable, routine. And then, in what feels like a single frame, a second dark car appears directly in the path of the BMW out of absolutely nowhere, not pulling out from a side street, not rolling in from the edge of the shot, just there suddenly, as if it materialized in the middle of the road. The BMW slams its brakes. A collision is barely avoided, and the dash dashcam driver reacts with the kind of shock you would expect from watching something that should not be physically possible. When the clip started circulating online in early 2014, the internet lost its mind over it. Top Gear republished it and genuinely asked whether Russia had ghost cars. Our Reddit threads filled up with people arguing not just about traffic blame, but about the nature of reality itself. Some called it a glitch in the Matrix. Some said it had to be CGI. Others just watched it over and over, trying to find the moment where logic broke down. Because on first watch and second watch, and honestly fifth watch, it really does look like a car spawned into existence from nothing. So what actually happened? The internet did what it occasionally does well and started investigating properly. People on forums began pulling the clip apart frame by frame, and the answer they landed on is something called occlusion, which sounds technical but is actually very simple. Occlusion just means one object is hidden behind another object. The ghost car was there the whole time. It never disappeared and reappeared. It was simply blocked from the dashcam's view by the BMW turning in front of it in such a perfect and complete way that the camera registered absolutely nothing until the two vehicles' paths separated and the hidden car suddenly popped into visibility. Investigators went further and identified the intersection as Chertanovskaya in Moscow. Once the location was pinned, they could map out the geometry of what likely happened. The ghost car appears to have approached from the opposite direction and either misread the signal or ran the red entirely. From that driver's position, the turn may have looked clear. A tram in the background was possibly blocking their view of the relevant light, and a nearby green pedestrian signal could have made the scene feel safer than it was. One driver made a bad read, entered the intersection on a collision path, and the geometry of the turn hid them from the dash cam until it was almost too late. There is also a detail in the road surface that matters. Careful viewers pointed out that the ghost car's headlights were actually visible as reflections on the wet road underneath the BMW before the dramatic reveal. Not the car itself, just its light bouncing off the pavement. If you know to look for it, you can track those reflections in the seconds before the car appears. The car was never invisible. Its light was leaking out from behind the BMW the whole time. Nobody noticed because nobody knew to look. I went back and watched this thing probably a dozen times after going through all of this, and here is what gets me. The debunk does not kill the feeling. You can know exactly what happened and understand the occlusion, understand the geometry, understand the reflections on the road, and then hit play again and it still looks wrong. The reveal moment does not stop feeling impossible just because you understand it. That is actually rare. Most viral mysteries deflate completely once explained. This one just changes shape. Instead of asking how a car teleported, you start asking how a completely ordinary vehicle at a completely ordinary intersection managed to defeat your eyes that completely. And honestly, that is the more interesting question. There is also something worth sitting with about what this clip actually teaches you about driving. Different drivers at that intersection had different sight lines. Someone watching the footage noticed that a car to the right appeared to brake earlier. I'm suggesting that driver saw the threat before the BMW did. The dashcam's angle happened to be the worst possible one for detecting what was coming, not because anything supernatural happened, because weather, geometry, a low-resolution consumer camera, and one driver's bad read all lined up in a way that made a real car vanish from view until the last second. That is not a glitch in the Matrix. That is just traffic, and somehow that is scarier. On the night of January 20th, 2008, a security camera inside an elevator in the Taiwanese city of Yuanlin recorded a woman in a red coat carrying a 4-year-old girl in pink. And as the elevator climbed toward the 11th floor, the woman did something that nobody who has watched the footage has ever been able to fully explain. She set her daughter down on the floor of the elevator, took off her own red coat, took off her daughter's pink coat, removed her own shoes and then her daughter's shoes, and left all of it in a pile on the elevator floor. Not folded, not arranged, just discarded the way a person discards things they have decided they will never need again. Throughout all of this, her eyes kept flicking upward to the floor indicator above the doors. And her face carried the kind of blankness that sits on the other side of extreme distress. When the doors opened at the 11th floor, she picked up her daughter and stepped out. The camera on that floor caught them turning left toward the stairwell, which is the last image of Liu Huijun and her 4-year-old daughter that exists anywhere on any recording device on Earth. The stairwell had no camera, and from that point forward, they are gone. The building was called the Yuanlin Finance and Economics Building, 11 stories above ground with 2 basement levels, and it had 13 security cameras covering the lobby, the underground parking garage, and the 11th floor. The security guard had gone home at 6 in the evening, and the elevator was scheduled to shut down at 9, which means Liu arrived just before the cutoff, and police reviewed every second of footage from all 13 cameras. Liu and her daughter are seen entering and riding the elevator up, but they are never seen coming back down, never seen exiting through the lobby or the parking garage, never seen on any camera anywhere in the building after stepping into that stairwell. The rooftop was accessible from the stairwell, and police searched every part of it, including the water tank and the railing, which was too high for a woman of Liu's small frame to climb over while holding a child. There was no blood, no fabric, no sign of impact on the ground below, and the gap between the building and surrounding structures was too wide to jump. Liu Huijun was 37 years old from a small town called Shetu, about 8 kilometers away. She had been trapped in a marriage to an alcoholic who beat her when he drank, which was every night. She had already divorced him once, but her mother pressured her into remarrying because in their community, a permanent divorce carried unbearable shame. The night before she disappeared, the couple had another violent argument, and Liu told her eldest daughter she was going to stay with a friend for a few days, then put her youngest on the back of her scooter and left without her wallet, without her phone, without her identification, without anything a person takes when they are planning to come back. She went first to her mother's house, and then for the next 6 hours her movements are completely unknown until she appeared in the lobby of the Yuanlin Finance and Economics Building, 11 stories above ground with 2 basement levels, and it had 13 security cameras covering the lobby, the underground parking garage, and the 11th floor. The security guard had gone home at 6 in the evening, and the elevator was scheduled to shut down at 9, which means Liu arrived just before the cutoff, and police reviewed every second of footage from all 13 cameras. Liu and her daughter are seen entering and riding the elevator up, but they are never seen coming back down his house because that is what she always did after a fight, and he only reported her missing after the story appeared on local television and he recognized the woman in the footage. The eldest daughter learned that her mother and little sister were missing the same way every stranger in the city did by watching the evening news, and police did not seriously investigate until 10 days after the disappearance because an adult going missing was not automatically treated as a criminal matter, and by that point, the surveillance footage from earlier that evening had already been overwritten, meaning anything that might have shown who Liu spoke to before her final elevator ride was gone permanently. When officers went door to door, they had no search warrant, so every conversation was voluntary, and if a resident said they had seen nothing, the officers simply moved on. Deep in the basement, there was a billiards hall containing a small, dark room referred to only as an air-conditioned room, and inside it was a fixed ladder attached to the wall that led directly up to street level with no camera covering the exit. It is physically possible for a person to descend from the 11th floor stairwell through the entire building, pass through that room, climb the ladder, and walk out onto the street without appearing on a single one of the 13 cameras. Over the years, police named the husband as a person of interest and questioned him repeatedly, but he cooperated as little as possible and nothing new ever surfaced. In December 2023, a court declared both Liu and her daughter legally dead. Then in 2024, the husband fell from a water tank he was repairing and died on impact, taking whatever he knew with him permanently. The daughter, who disappeared at age 4, would be 21 years old now. The red coat is still in evidence storage. The stairwell still has no camera. On March 11, 2011, a magnitude 9.0 earthquake struck off the Pacific coast of northeastern Japan and triggered a wall of water that in some areas reached nearly 40 meters in height. The tsunami hit harder and faster than anyone had predicted, and in the span of hours, entire cities along the Tohoku coastline were swallowed. Nearly 20,000 people lost their lives, and what most people don't fully process while watching the helicopter footage and the live news coverage is that the debris being carried through those streets, the rooftops spinning in that black water, the houses folding in on themselves, those are not empty structures. People were inside them, people who believed their homes were strong enough to withstand the wave, or who simply didn't get the warning in time, or who had nowhere left to run. In the raw NHK broadcasts, you can see figures scrambling up hillsides and across rooftops as the water closes in behind them, and you know watching it that not all of them made it. The helicopter just hovers there and the water just keeps coming, and it doesn't stop. It pushes through farmland and neighborhoods and highways, carrying cars and boats and entire buildings with it like they weigh nothing, and the anchors narrating the feed sound like they are struggling to comprehend what they are seeing as it happens in real time beneath them. But in the years that followed, people started noticing things in that footage that nobody had paid attention to at the time, and what began surfacing felt different from the usual paranormal clips because it wasn't staged or performed or submitted by an anonymous source. It was captured during live national broadcasts while the country watched its own coastline disappear. Probably the most analyzed clip of all came from a man on the ground named Kenichi Murakami, who was filming near the Okawa River in Kesanuma City as the water began to rise. Murakami knew the tsunami was coming and had started recording next to the river before seeking higher ground at a nearby school's emergency staircase. In his footage, something white and vaporous can be seen emerging from the floodwater near a small building, and at first it does look like it could be gas escaping from a ruptured line, which was the initial explanation most people landed on. But instead of dispersing the way gas normally would, it gathers at one specific spot near the building and just stays there, clinging to the structure as if it has somewhere it wants to be. You can see what appears to be a tail of vapor still being sprayed out from the water, but the main mass of it stays fixed in place, and then it breaks away, climbs upward, and vanishes completely. Analysts who examined the footage ran what's known as a relief examination to determine whether something had been digitally superimposed over the video, and found no evidence of tampering, no hard edges, no pixelation, no signs of compositing, and the movement was described as billowy and organic rather than artificial. A second angle of the same building revealed that the roof had an overhang that extended beyond the walls, which could explain why the vapor appeared to slow down and collect in that area. But the fact that it gathered and held position and then climbed and disappeared was something that no one could fully account for. The second clip came from the live NHK helicopter coverage of the tsunami sweeping through Sendai. In the upper left portion of the frame, white transparent shapes can clearly be seen coming out of the water and disappearing into thin air, moving at a speed that doesn't match anything else in the shot. Some viewers pointed out that it could be flash evaporation from a ruptured industrial tank, or steam being forced out of a collapsing structure, or a visual artifact from the broadcast compression. But what made the clip stick was how deliberate the movement looked, almost like something was gliding out of the wreckage and across the surface of the water before vanishing entirely. And in that same broadcast, something dark appears directly in front of the helicopter camera and flies sharply to the left before disappearing out of frame in less than a second. It could be a bird or a piece of debris caught in the rotor wash, but its shape and trajectory didn't match any of those explanations cleanly, and people dissected the clip frame by frame, adjusting contrast and brightness, trying to isolate exactly what it was, and neither side ever settled the debate. But the accounts that really shook people didn't come from the footage at all. They came from the survivors, and they started appearing almost immediately after the water receded. In the city of Ishinomaki, one of the hardest hit areas in Miyagi Prefecture, a sociologist geology student at Tohoku Gakuen University named Yuka Kudo interviewed more than 100 taxi drivers for her graduation thesis, asking each of them whether they had experienced anything unusual since the disaster. 7 of them told her stories that were remarkably similar. One driver described picking up a young woman near Ishinomaki Station in the early summer of 2011. She was wearing a heavy winter coat despite the warm weather and was soaking wet even though it hadn't rained in days, and she asked to be taken to the Minamihama district, an area that had been almost completely destroyed by the wave. After a long pause, she asked the driver in a trembling voice if she had died, and when he turned around to respond, the back seat was completely empty. Other drivers described similar encounters, picking up young passengers who gave specific addresses and then simply vanished partway through the ride. In every case, the drivers had already started their meters, meaning they had to personally cover the fare, which means they had no financial incentive to fabricate their stories, and in fact had a direct reason not to tell anyone about them at all. These spirits, called yurei in Japanese folklore, are believed to carry the strongest sense of unresolved attachment to the physical world when they die suddenly and before their time. And what made these accounts different from old folklore was the sheer number of them happening at the same time in the same place from people who had no connection to each other. Whether these encounters were genuine supernatural events or the psychological projections of a community processing unimaginable grief is something that nobody has definitively answered, and the footage from that day, with its strange white shapes and unexplained movements, continues to resist clean explanation no matter how many times it gets pulled apart and analyzed.